3 minutes after 10 is the time. A very good morning to you. How many times have you heard the phrase, sometimes indeed from people who've been a little bit slow, shall we say, or unenthusiastic in their condemnation of the race riots or the Farage riots, whatever you prefer, that we've been seeing unfold on our streets in recent days? How many times have you heard them say we need to have a sensible conversation about immigration? Do you know what happens to them when we have sensible conversations about immigration? They reach for ever more provocative and absurd lies, up to and including, of course, two-tier policing, which is the phrase du jour for the kind of people who have both fomented and contributed to the civil disorder that we're all enduring. A sensible conversation about immigration. What they mean when they say that, the people who never talk about anything else, what they mean when they say that is we have to keep closing people down or shouting ever louder until everybody either agrees with us that you should judge people by their ethnicity or by their origins, their geographical origins, or anybody who objects to that has just been crushed into silence, either through intimidation or a form of, I suppose, intellectual ennui. I just can't be bothered anymore arguing with you people who believe things that aren't true. It's just exhausting. It's a bit like what Twitter has become in recent years, but I guess that's a fairly well documented phenomenon anyway. So I have had many sensible conversations about immigration over the years. The point at which they cease to be sensible is when people ring me to tell me that the immigrants get free houses or free cars or free shops, or that they have a better life than people that were born here. That is the point at which the conversation ceases to be a sensible conversation about immigration. And because the conversations about immigration have been insensible for so long, I think we can all agree that the entire tone of conversation ended. It changed enormously in 2016. I don't know if you remember the Breaking Point poster that appeared shortly before Joe Cox was assassinated by a white supremacist racist terrorist, or whether you remember the front pages of the newspapers that we ran through yesterday to point out the hypocrisy of, for example, the Daily Mail celebrating the rejection of race rioters when pretty much every front page they had in the 3 weeks running up to the 2016 referendum vote could have been a banner at a race riot, at one of the riots that we've been seeing this week. So you have this scenario where people who want to have completely insensible conversations about immigration, the kind of people who think that you can blame every Muslim in the country for the actions of one extremist, or even you could blame every Muslim in the country for the actions of one person who wasn't even a Muslim. That's entirely insensible. It's borderline insane. It's certainly delusional, it's certainly unhinged, but they are the people who keep saying we need to have a sensible conversation about immigration. Just think about it. It's absolutely bonkers. And what's incredible, and I want to make it clear before I look at the policies that have created the crisis that we find ourselves facing today, is that the Labour Party have gone along with it. I don't want anybody to think, as I now launch into a brief critique of why the care sector is in a perilous state, and why British universities could soon be facing some very, very serious problems as a direct consequence of Conservative policies. Rhetorically, at least, Keir Starmer's Labour Party has done next to nothing to push the conversation back in the opposite direction. So here's a headline. Bear with me a moment. All right, if you are a bit racist, then I think you'll react to this headline differently from how I would. So here's the headline. Well, no, maybe that's not fair. You don't have to be racist. You've got legitimate concerns about immigration, right? You've got legitimate, or at least you think they are legitimate concerns. And I respect your freedom of thought. I really do. So here are your legitimate concerns. There's far too much of it. I don't mean you. You don't mean the people that you know. You don't mean the nurses that you interact with, or the teachers, or the lawyers, or the accountants, or the hospitality staff, or the delivery driver. You don't mean the people that you encounter. Some do, of course. There's some horrific footage of a bus driver being abused in the roundest fashion that's doing the rounds today. But you know that there's far too many of them. Not the ones you see, maybe the ones that are sort of, that they're living over in the next street, and the kind of ones that appear in the stories, the ones with all the houses and the massive handout. Yeah, them. There's too many of them. So you're one of those people. And although you probably think that I'm being facetious, I do have some sympathy for you up until the point that you are shown the truth and you choose to continue to believe the things that are not true. So I do have some sympathy for you. You hear this headline: visa curbs spark rapid fall in new migrants. It's on the front page of today's Times newspaper. Visa falls spark rapid fall in new migrants. That's great, right? That is absolutely brilliant. Poor old Rishi Sunak, he should have hung around for a little bit longer and seen the fruits of his policies designed to deliver precisely what this front page headline describes. A rapid fall in new migrants. What do we want? Fewer migrants. When do we want it? 1959. So that's great news, right? And then you get the second bit of the line. And what I'm interested in, if you think this is something to celebrate, is the point at which you go, maybe this isn't actually the brilliant news that I thought it was. And I don't know if you ever reach that point. I don't know if that point is ever actually reached. But let's see, shall we? So the stand first, the sort of mini headline below the main headline, contains the lines: requests to work or study in UK down by a third. Right, we still celebrating? So people wanting to come here to work, and the way that this visa system works, the job would already exist. It is, you would be applying to fill an established vacancy or to take up a place in an educational institution that you were qualified to take up, right? Requests to work or study in UK down by a third. Are we still celebrating? I don't know. So then the story itself begins. Britain's high levels of immigration are falling significantly after curbs on visas contributed to a sharp decline in foreign workers and students applying to the UK. The number of migrants and their family members seeking to come to Britain on skilled worker, health and care and study visas fell by more than a third in July to 91,300 compared with last year. That's a big number. That's a big drop. Are you still celebrating? Is this still great news? Great, yeah, we need fewer of them. We need fewer skilled workers. We need fewer health and care workers. And we certainly need fewer students, bloody students, coming over here learning stuff. And then we come to the third paragraph. The fall has been particularly stark in monthly applications for health and care visas, with an 82% decline in their number to just 2,900 in July. The number of people applying to study in the UK has fallen by 15% to 69,500. And remember, the fees that are paid by foreign students are higher than the fees paid by domestic students, which means that they help to subsidise the education of our children, or even us, if we're thinking of going back into education a little late in life. And then the fourth paragraph. The previous Conservative government banned those coming to study in the UK and those on health and social care visas from bringing family members with them. We already know about the enormous costs that can be accrued by these people. And the kicker for me, of course, as someone who leans to the more equable and compassionate side of politics, or the left, as some people prefer to call it, Labour has said it has no plans to change the policy. Two things going on here. One is, I think, a fairly obvious reaction to being made to feel less welcome. A bit like when everybody voted Leave to get rid of all the immigrants and they left. And they went, oh, no, I didn't mean you. But it was too late because they were already back in Poland or France or Germany. And the second thing that's happening here is politically advantageous to Keir Starmer if you accept the necessity of appeasing or pandering to or looking after people who think that the numbers are more important than the realities, who will simply celebrate. As I said to you yesterday, the numbers are going to come down so far and so fast, partly because of these disgusting policies, but also because of the spikes delivered by Ukraine and Hong Kong. So by the autumn, when the numbers are released, I would not be surprised, and nor would the head of the migration watchdog, if the figure has come down to below 200,000. Whereas, of course, at the moment it's, I think it's 764,000, the highest it has ever been. So they're going to plummet. They would have plummeted anyway, even without alienating health and care workers or students. So in many ways, these policies will have helped Keir Starmer deliver on his questionable promise to reduce those figures, those enormous sums of 764,000 and the year before 685,000. The problem is that various sectors have enormous problems. Michael is in Basel, and he's delighted. He says, the best news I've heard for years. 130,000 vacancies at the moment in the social care sector. It's the best news that Michael in Basildon has heard for years. And that's what I want to address today. Not him specifically, but there are, of course, plenty of people who do think or will think that this is good news. What is the sensible thing you can say about this? How do we intelligently address the fact that even if you subscribe to the, to me at least, profoundly unpleasant rhetoric that we should, quotes, train our own, end quotes, who are you going to train? The people setting fire to hotels? People lobbing wheelie bins at the police? We're going to get them into the care homes, are we, to look after your nan? So how do you have a sensible conversation about the disastrous consequences of policies designed to appeal to people who want immigration reduced, like Michael in Basildon, no questions asked? I don't care. I just want the numbers to be lower, despite the fact that it will damage every single sector of our society, every single level of our society. And if you think that the kind of troglodytes throwing bricks at the police this week are going to be somehow rendered decent members of society by a massive drop in the number of foreign workers and foreign students coming here, then I've got several bridges to sell you. Mark points out the problem is that you can't debate with idiots. It's a living, Mark. I think you have to try, don't you? You have to at least try to do so. But all of the people, of course, who talk about having a sensible conversation about immigration actually mean the opposite. The last thing they want to do is talk about why it is a good idea to have hundreds of thousands of vacancies that could be quite easily filled by a visa system that was working quite well. So I'm going to open up the phone lines. What I really want to know, because I haven't got an answer to this. I know what you're thinking. I've got an answer for everything. I haven't. I've got an opinion about everything, but I haven't got an answer to this. I haven't actually got an opinion about this. And I hope I'm not even falling foul of the Overton window by asking this question, but the fact that the Labour Party's got no plans to change these policies means that we have to, I think. Why? How do you do it? What is the conversation that recognises the necessity of high-ish immigration in the low hundreds of thousands, without stopping people who we need here coming? So there are two ways into this. One of them, as you can tell, is a little bit flabby intellectually, because what I want, I can tell it's flabby intellectually because the producer's looking at me with a very confused face. She gets very cross if I don't ask a nice, simple, encapsulated question. You'd think, wouldn't you, after all these years, she'd got used to my verbal meanderings. I know you are. You can still ring in and answer these questions, even without knowing what the questions are. I've got enormous faith in you for doing that. But it makes her job considerably harder, for which I apologise. But what I'm looking for, the sort of golden egg this morning, is how you square the necessity of immigration in these sectors with the rhetoric and the politics of constant insistence that it's all too high. I can't see the way through it. I've talked to you about what they say in private versus what they say in public. What they say in public is we need to bring it down. We need to bring it down. What they say in private is we need foreign workers to come here. So what do we do if you want to buy into the we can train our own or whatever it may be? What do we do in the meantime? Let's pretend it's true that we can take armies of people who are currently doing something else or doing nothing and turn them into nurses and turn them into care workers and turn them into veterinary surgeons and turn them into chefs and turn them into waiters and turn them into hotel receptionists and hotel managers. So we can easily do it. We can take some fella when he gets out of jail for setting fire to a hotel. We can stick him on a training scheme, and this time next week he'll be the manager at Claridge's. So let's pretend that's true. What do we do in the meantime? What do we do in the meantime? And the second way into it is how it's affecting you. So if you run a care home, I've had some lovely conversations over the years with people who run care homes. If you run a care home, how hard is it now? If you're in hospitality, and does anybody know how this is going to impact upon the educational sector? And what does it mean to British universities to see a sharp fall in the number of students coming here from overseas? What will it impact? What will the impact be? So how does it affect your world? 0345 6060 973. And how do we have the sensible conversation? What is the sensible conversation? If both parties are in support of policies that suck potential staff out of crucial what is the sensible conversation about immigration? Because I'm not sure I know, and I do this for a living. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973. What does the sensible conversation about immigration sound like? In the context of figures that show it's coming down, woohoo, but it's hitting sectors that we really need. Oh, do you see the problem? I hope you do, but if you don't, it's probably my fault. The figure, some 81% applications for care worker visas are down 81% on last year. Student visa applications down 16%. And if you were sitting in a foreign country at the moment and thinking, I might go and work in a care home, or I might go and do my degree in England, look at what's coming out of your television screens. Look at the photographs that are appearing on your news feeds online. Look at the photographs that are appearing on the front pages of your newspapers, because the riots in England are big news. Everywhere else, there's a dire skills shortage, 130,000 vacancies in care. Student application, if this drop carries on through September, then universities are not going to fill their places. And if universities don't fill their places, they become financially inviable. And I don't know how big a role in that particular process scenes of race riots on the streets of England will play. But if you are not from England and thinking of coming to England to work in the care sector or be a student, and then, of course, we've got the skilled visas as well. That's a whole new world. Are you more or less likely to come as a consequence of what you've been watching this week? And, of course, it may not be over yet, as Keir Starmer has been warning in the last 24 hours. 24 minutes after 10 is the time. So what is this so-called sensible conversation that all of the people currently addicted to insensible conversations keep insisting that the rest of us have? Mark's in Deptford. Mark, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Welcome.
I have worked in the staffing and recruitment industry for over 30 years. Sometimes feel responsible for Brexit because at one point had 35,000 Eastern Europeans working in Lincolnshire and Cambridgeshire.
In agriculture and
agriculture and food processing, making packing chocolates, those sorts of things.
Okay.
And
so it's all your fault then?
Well, I do blame myself because Boston is the only place I think that still would vote for Brexit.
Yeah.
And
is it?
We had 20,000 workers in that area. They would queue up outside the offices every morning to get a job. We didn't have any locals applying back then. I think the sensible conversation is we needed the workers. The industries wanted those workers. In fact, we had to stop some of them saying only Polish applicants required,
right?
Because that's actually racist.
Yeah.
But Indigenous workers were either unwilling or unable to do those jobs back then.
And yet they became, as you've alluded to, well, not alluded to, as you've described, they became the parts of the population most convinced that the people doing the jobs they weren't applying for were stealing jobs from them, ergo they voted for Brexit.
Exactly, because what didn't happen is obviously the industries wanted the workers, but the councils and the authorities didn't identify what that was going to mean for community. And I think it's planning, it's public services, it's seeing Polish shops in Boston and Peterborough and other places, which was a big shock for the local people.
So has anyone ever really, since 2016, done what you would do and try at least to explain why? And I mean, 35,000 is an extraordinary number when you look at the possibility of the overall number coming below 200,000 later this year, and just say, look, I understand why you get upset because so many people's careers depend upon upsetting you, but your life depends upon these people coming. Your life, your quality of life depends upon these people coming to this country and doing these jobs.
Absolutely, and now the hostile environment. I've got friends from Asia, Vietnam, who are feeling so unwanted. The visa situation is so difficult now for them to move between jobs, as well as European. And of course, doctors and medics particularly doctors, can work anywhere in the world. So why would they come here?
And yet the rhetoric remains either appeasing or ambivalent or actively and explicitly negative. How's if you don't mind me asking, how's your business been affected?
Well, I work now as a consultant to staffing businesses, so that it's always there's always work to do to advise them on that. But just something else I would say is I was also I was an expert advisor to one of the biggest universities in London, and with fees having been frozen and no inflationary increases for a number of years, we can have another debate whether over 9,000 for education is a good price or not. The requirement for international students to come and fund those Rhetoric and Russell Group universities is so important to their survival, let alone them thriving. And that's another part of this. So if student numbers are falling, even more universities are going to go to the wall. We are actually going to see universities go bust this year, I think.
Well, there'll be other people, perhaps even closer to that sector than you are, who will be able to comment on that as well. But you're not the first person I've heard say it. In fact, we had a message, didn't we, earlier in the week from someone in a university recruitment office describing how they were having applications cancelled, applications withdrawn as a consequence of the riots. So just think for a minute, Mark, thank you. It was a brilliant debut. I look forward to talking to you again. Think for a moment how you felt if you lived in an area, as I did actually. So a pal of my daughter's was supposed to come over on Tuesday night and obviously didn't, because our part of town was one of the areas that was on the list of potential targets for the race riots. And you say to your children, maybe don't go out tonight. Whatever ethnicity you may be, obviously if you're of colour or visibly Muslim, you're going to be much more terrorised by these people. But everybody else also said, maybe I won't go out this tonight, just on the nights when they're supposed to happen. And then, of course, as Lizzie did and told us earlier this week, the biggest flare-ups have been organic. They haven't been the ones that are planned or promoted on social media. So you've got the fear of the unknown as well. So if we who live here are thinking, I might not go out, what if you live somewhere else and you're thinking, I might not go to that country? Quite extraordinary, isn't it? And that's the problem with the, quotes, sensible conversation, end quotes. It will never deliver conclusions that the xenophobic opponents of immigration like. So you might say at this point, well, I'm not talking about legal immigration, except you are. Guess what the figure is? What do you think the figure is? So I say that Labour hasn't done anything to push back against Tory policies. It's done a couple of things, a couple of relatively small things. But Yvette Cooper has paused plans to raise the income threshold needed to bring a foreign partner to the UK. So if you fall in love with a foreigner, as Nigel Farage has done twice, if you fall in love with a foreigner and you want them to come to this country, how much do you think you currently need to be earning to do that? Obviously, if you're in this, you'll know. But if you're, like me, completely removed from this scenario, how high do you think that figure is currently? And even more shocking, I genuinely want you to have a guess at this. the figure that the last government, the Tory government, were going to raise it to. Yvette Cooper has now paused plans to raise the threshold to this figure. But what do you think the figure is that you need to be earning in order to bring, let's say, your pregnant partner to this country so that you can raise your child together? How much do you think you need to be earning right now? And how much do you think the Tories were trying to raise it to if they'd won the last election? I think you're going to be stunned by these numbers, but I could be wrong, I suppose. It's 10:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Thomas Watts has the headlines. 10:34 is the time. If I took an average, oh Lord, I don't know if you were listening yesterday. Let's stay away from averages, whatever we do. But I think most of you thought that about 25 grand would be the figure that you need to earn in order to bring a foreign partner to the UK from overseas. Some of you thought it was 18 grand, which was true before the Tories increased it. That was this year. So this year, they increased it from £18,600 to £29,000. So if you want to bring your pregnant partner here from overseas, anywhere overseas, you need to be earning 29 grand. This time last year, you needed to be earning £18,600. But if the Home Secretary hadn't paused the Tory policy, and pause is, of course, not the same as bin, the figure had gone up to £38,700 if you wanted to bring your partner here from overseas, regardless of whether or not they were going to get a job themselves on their first day in the country. And of course, the partner coming over, possibly not the pregnant one, but all the other non-pregnant partners coming over, male and female, would be able to join the workforce. A workforce in which there are currently 130,000 vacancies in the care sector alone. Universities, if you are wondering, people listening to this programme know more about it than I do. Andrew writes, the effect of reduced numbers of foreign students is simple, James, and direct to understand. I'm a lecturer at a UK university. We've recently been told that consultations have begun to reduce the number of lecturers employed as student numbers decline. The effect of reducing student numbers is literally to threaten the existence of universities and the thousands of jobs they provide. So these policies are deliberately designed to do what is now happening, to create vacancies in sectors and to threaten the survival of British universities. So what does the sensible conversation about immigration sound like? Kevin's in Glasgow. Kevin, what do you think?
So, slightly complicated answer to the question, I guess. James.
I bet it's not as complicated as the question. It took me 20 minutes.
Well, my issue is with the question.
Go on.
Fundamentally.
Fair enough.
And what I mean by that is that I think that the political right, shall we say, like to use immigration as a simple answer to very complex questions in society. The reason you don't have a job is because of the immigrants. The reason that, house prices and wages, the differences between the two is skyrocketing, immigration. And actually, immigration isn't the problem. I think the problem is wealth inequality. And for them, and by them I mean those that sit on the political right, it is far easier to talk about immigration as being the issue rather than looking at the more complex issues we face in society.
I think you're being generous. I think they are generally beneficiaries of the wealth inequality to the point where they love nothing more than the fact that poor white people are blaming poor brown people for their poorness.
Absolutely. And they prey on this. And I think unfortunately maybe the media in the left or the more mainstream media don't do a good enough job, if you like, of articulating this. But then that all stems from when we look at who owns our media these days.
Up to a point, Lord Copper. But I'm more interested in what the left-wing politicians are doing, because they would presumably know that what you say is true. It's rhetoric as old as the hills. I love that cartoon of Rupert Murdoch sitting there with, you mentioned media owners, so I'll give one of my favourite ever cartoons a quick run out. He's sitting there with a big pile of biscuits on the table in front of them, and he takes all of them except I don't know, gives one to the foreign worker sitting on the side and takes all the others himself, and then turns to the Brit and says, "Look, that immigrant's nicked all your biscuits." That in a nutshell is what you are describing.
Yeah.
But how does that? Because it's easy to have a swing at vested interest or mainstream media. How does that translate into effective conversation? So here's the fellow who believes, genuinely and passionately believes, that his life and his country are being damaged by immigration, maybe up to and including the point where he decides to articulate his frustration by setting fire to hotels or attacking police officers. How do you have that conversation with him, or, if that's too big a challenge, with his more mild-mannered fellow traveller?
I think that's a really difficult.
Well, that's the question I've actually been asking. So when you ring in to find fault with the question, go on.
So to answer that question directly, then, James. So I think the first big thing is around education in schools, particularly looking
Too late. He's already there. He's already left school. Yeah, so what are you going to say to him? You've got to have a sensible conversation with him.
So if I was having a sensible conversation to him, I would be highlighting to him the benefits of immigration. So I would be talking about, the benefits it has for our health service, the benefits it has for our educational services and things like that. I think the problem that I know that you've come across in the past is very often you talk to some of these people and they just don't change their mind. I think there is a degree of the population where this has become so entrenched in their thinking, it's almost became part of their identity to be this way, and it can be very difficult to change that with people.
So you can't think of a way of conducting the conversation? Because this is why I've recently developed the habit of getting to the end of an exchange with some of the people that perhaps we're describing and asking whether they've changed their mind about anything as a consequence of having their beliefs examined and dismissed, refuted. Disproved is the best word.
So maybe we're right. It's too late to have that conversation with them. That conversation should be had with them years ago.
Yeah, I'm changing at the moment. I'm changing my views as a consequence of these riots. The stuff I've stayed away from because I couldn't see the point. The people I haven't really mentioned or given oxygen to, that tactic has failed. So, all you can do is keep putting it out there, keep putting the facts out there. That wonderful Stuart Lee line. I don't know. I must check with him, actually, whether or not he got it from this show or whether I got it from him. But when he said you can prove anything with facts, I'm sure I had a caller, didn't I, who said you can prove anything with facts, James. And it was one of those moments where you just thought, this mountain might be a little harder to climb than I originally realised. But it doesn't mean you stop putting them out there. So apart from our friend in Basildon, who is celebrating the fact that there are 130,000 vacancies in the social care sector and some British universities could be facing existential threat. Yay! What do we want? Fewer universities, less education, more people not getting the care that they need when they become poorly or when they become too old to care for themselves. Hey, celebrating that. And those people exist. Those are probably the ones Kevin's talking about. There's not much point trying to engage with the so-called thinking of Michael in Basildon. But for anybody, I'm fascinated by the constituency of people whose minds are capable of changing. What do these figures do to you? It's too much of it. It's too much of it. Okay, so this year it's expected to come down to below 200,000, and we've got 130,000 vacancies in the care sector alone. So what to you does a sensible conversation about immigration sound like? Jack's in Braintree. Jack, what would you like to say?
I agree with so much of what's been said before, but I think people have got to be careful for what they wish for. My wife works for an NHS trust, and yesterday the chief executive had a meeting with all the staff because a lot of them are from the BAME communities, and that they were terrified. Most of them were terrified to go to work. Most of them were terrified to go to the places of worship. Most of them are terrified to go out, let their children out. Most of them are terrified to stay in the country. And so I think what's going to happen is what happened after Brexit is a lot of people from the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Polish, they returned back to Spain and Portugal because they weren't made to feel welcome. And I think that's what's going to happen. And the situation is just going to get worse. And you only have to go out. You step outside your door and look at the education. Look at the police, look at the NHS to see the benefits of immigration. So you don't have to be persuaded. You only just have to open your eyes.
Well, obviously that's not true, is it? Because there'll be loads of people who see what we see when we open our eyes and yet don't arrive at the conclusions that we arrive at.
Yeah, because it suits them. It suits the victim, and it suits certain politicians. How they ever got voted, I never know. It suits them as well.
What's the vacancy situation at the moment in your wife's health trust? Do you know?
Well, it's terrible. They're desperately going over to different countries now to bring people over, and it's difficult. And you speak about you have to earn a certain amount of money to get your partner over, but that's only half the story. Because if they want to come over, they have to pay for visas and things like that. And
NHS
I've got
access.
a friend at work. Yeah, and I've got a friend at work who's the visas. I think at the end of it, I think it's like a 5-year process. I think it's something like £12,000 or £13,000. But my wife was like visibly, she was crying after because these people were distraught. And why would they stay? Why would you stay?
If you've seen people who look like you getting attacked because they look like you, or getting abused because they look like you, I don't know the answer to that question. It's worse than I can remember it being.
My wife's got mixed race children. To the bigoted eye, could be anything from Asian to Caribbean, and she's terrified. She's terrified for them to go out, and they're adults. And I would like to turn around and say you're being silly, you're overreacting.
Yeah, me too. But you can't. You can't, can you?
No, you can't.
There's a clip doing the rounds at the moment of a bus driver being abused in the most disgusting terms and indeed spat at simply for appearing to be Muslim.
It's soul destroying, and this country's never done badly out of immigration. The Jewish community who come over, Italian communities came over, the Caribbean communities came over, and with Polish community, large Polish communities came over. We've never done badly out of immigration. Never.
And that is a sensible conversation about immigration, but that is most definitely not the conversation that people like Suella Braverman or Nigel Farage want to have. So when they say we need to have a sensible conversation about immigration, I'm not quite sure what they mean. Jack, are you?
No, I've no idea. And I've had to change my name. I feel a bit of a fraud because I had to change my name because I don't want my wife identified. But I feel a bit of a fraud, to be honest with you, because I despise. Because whatever happens in this country, whatever happens, someone drops a sweet wrapper on the floor, and all they go on about is immigration. And it's not the massive issue. It's not what this country's about. And a couple of days ago, I used to work in Walthamstow, and it warmed my cockles to see all those people out on the street, that made my day. My day.
There were a lot of toasty cockles around, I think, on Tuesday night, weren't there? I think. Thank you for that, Jack. He says, and the idea of being frightened for your children, having lived here all your life, when you imagine what it is going to look like to someone thinking of sending their children here to study from elsewhere in the world and spend money that our economy really needs at the moment, it's not very hard to work out, is it? This is good from Ken, who's in Yorkshire. I get this quite a lot, but I'm not going to put Ken in idiot's corner because he's simply repeating what he's heard other people say. James O'Brien is missing the point. Controlled immigration is not being challenged, as this is positive and good for the country. However, the uncontrolled illegal immigration is out of control. That's the issue. Ken, the increase in the amount of money that you need to earn to bring your partner here, or indeed the decision to stop people coming here on skilled worker visas or care visas from being able to bring their wives or their husbands or their families, those are immigration controls, Ken. It is precisely the controls put on immigration by the politicians that I presume you vote for that have created the collapse in applications, particularly in sectors that I don't know how old you are, but the people who you will, I hope, not need to look after you soon, those people, that sector has a 130,000 sized vacancy as a direct consequence of immigration controls. So the reason I'm not putting you in idiot's corner is because I think you send me these messages in good faith, but that is controlled immigration. It is controls on immigration that is delivering disastrous news for our education sector, for our skilled worker situation, and for our care sector. So, I with respect, you've got to give your head a wobble. And that's a sensible conversation. 10 to 11 is the time. the public will have to go in and the public will have to sort this out themselves, and it'll be very, very brutal. But I don't want them here. I don't want them to live here. They came under false pretenses. That is one of Andrew Neil's protégés at The Spectator, a character called Douglas Murray, in an interview that has appeared online in the last few hours. I am lost for words as I look at that, actually. I mean, if you've read my book, How They Broke Britain, you'll know that I know quite a lot about this character and about the kind of attitudes that Andrew Neil has fermented over at his Spectator magazine, along with the editor, Fraser Nelson. But even in context, that phrase is hideous. The public will have to go in and the public will have to sort this out themselves, and it'll be very, very brutal. So is that a sensible conversation about immigration? Is that what they mean? This lad Murray is a bit of a darling of the very right wing. I think Suella Braverman has spoken very warmly of him in Parliament. Is that what they mean by a sensible conversation about immigration? The public will have to go in and the public will have to sort this out themselves, and it will be very, very brutal. I don't know, but I hope not. Chris is in Sunderland. Chris, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
this is my first time calling.
You're very welcome.
I was listening with interest to Nick Ferrari earlier when he was talking to a former police constable from the northeast about the racist attitudes in Sunderland, because obviously we had the riots here. Yeah. And it's not just towards immigrants, it's towards students as well, which kind of fits into what you were talking about.
What, British students?
No, foreign students.
Oh, so they are immigrants, but you mean not immigrant workers or asylum seekers? You just mean foreign students, visibly or apparently foreign students?
It seems to be just anybody foreign. And we have a lot of foreign students in Sunderland at our universities. And one of the things that happens with empty shops because of the decline of High Street that Sunderland Council's been doing is making them into student accommodation. And the abuse and the propaganda that's online about these students just because they're living here.
What sort of things?
They say that they're taking over the town and they're taking, the shops should be used for British people and not foreign people to live in and things like that. And it's all the propaganda that fuels all this hatred, and that feeds into this kind of things, I think. Not just towards immigrants, but towards students as well. And there's just so much hatred. And it's gone on in Sunderland for quite a long time, I think. We used to get visits from Tommy Robinson many years back.
Right.
And then obviously Brexit came along and it's just risen and risen. And it's pretty dark, I think. I don't like it.
No, well, no, nor do I. It's a very human description at the end there. I just don't like it. It's scary, right? I mean, because if you think someone's stealing your job, then I guess you are tinder that is more easily ignited by the kind of characters that you've referred to. But what are we talking about now? Chinese mathematicians?
Well, for instance,
I mean, Chinese math students are now the enemy.
Well, apparently, it's. I can't really see the logic behind the abuse and the hatred. I mean, for instance, I live literally in Sunderland city centre, and I'm surrounded by students and foreigners and all that. Not that it bothers me, but one of my neighbours went to Sunderland University, and she graduated, and she could have gone back home.
Yeah,
but she stayed, and she's taken a job in the NHS.
And she wouldn't now.
Yeah, well,
I can't say that. But she'd be less. It's a much less welcoming place now than it was when she made that decision.
Well, thankfully, she's been on holiday during all this chaos, so she's missed it. But it's the point that she could have left the country after she'd graduated, but she stayed. She's made a home here, and she's taken a job, and in the NHS as well, which we're desperate for.
I know.
So, and the problem with these people, the far right and the racists, they just swallow everything they see online. They don't want to talk about the facts. They don't want to educate themselves.
They don't want a sensible conversation.
No, they don't.
Which is what they keep telling us they want and what they need to have. Because a sensible conversation leads to the places that we go on this programme. It leads to your neighbour. It leads to Jack in Braintree describing his wife's colleagues in a mental health trust, crying in fear at what might happen to them if they were set upon on their way to and from work. It leads to acknowledgement of the size of the holes that will be left in our social care sector if this policy isn't reversed. And it speaks to things that politicians can't control, because it speaks to the impact of race riots or Farage riots on British streets, impacting upon people overseas thinking of coming to here to work or coming to here to study.
Exactly. I mean, Sunderland in particular, Sunderland's gotten funding for new film studios to be built on the riverside.
I read about that.
And originally there was a large uptick in university applications for like film studies and things like that. That might be affected now because people have looked at what happens in
Google Sunderland. You Google Sunderland.
Yeah.
You think, oh, that sounds nice. I'll go on that course. I don't know much about Sunderland. Whether you're applying from Surrey or whether you're applying from Sarajevo, I'll have a look at that. No, maybe not.
And then they see an article by West Streeting about those Filipino nurses in Sunderland being abused and attacked, trying to go to work.
And Lee Anderson telling his followers that the local hotel, wherever in Ashfield, was full of asylum seekers, and then having to backtrack and say, oh no, it turns out they were foreign nurses after all. Everybody relax. And it is just extraordinary that these people can act in this way without any thought whatsoever for either the truth or the consequences. Why, Chris, is Sunderland particularly... Because I think didn't Sunderland swing first for Brexit as well, wasn't it? The announcement in Sunderland.
Yes.
Why is that? It's not a place I know well. The northeast is a bit of a hole in my...
I think after the Tories got in...
Yeah.
And this is something I don't vote Tory, but even in an unbiased way, I will never forgive them for making it more okay to be racist.
No.
You know, the rise of the UKIP and even the BNP, because the BNP stood in 2019. Tommy Robinson visited quite a lot, and I think people in Sunderland who live in deprived places, they just fall for all this nonsense that they see online, and it feeds how they already feel, and I think they feel like it legitimizes it.
Are there areas of particular deprivation?
Here and there. I mean, to me, I don't feel it's any worse anywhere else in the country, but Sunderland's not a bad place to live.
No, I want to make that absolutely clear. But there's some interesting research in the FT today looking at the correlation between riots and deprivation, and it is extraordinary. I mean, it's almost a circle rather than a Venn diagram. Two other things that are interesting as well. Again, the Tory decision to put asylum seekers in hotels in the very, very poor areas, ostensibly to save money, although I don't think they would have done. That has contributed to it as well, because you're going to have a higher proportion of asylum seekers in these hotels, which doesn't have to be a problem, of course, until people like Nigel Farage turn up at the hotels. In fact, he chose a very posh-looking one, I'm sure completely by accident, turn up at a hotel with their camcorder and suggest that they might be full of ISIS terrorists. That's the point at which having asylum seekers in a hotel in your area becomes more problematic than it was before. But the other thing that was really interesting, they've got very low incidences of immigration. The areas with high deprivation and a higher propensity for rioting in the last couple of weeks have some of the lowest levels of immigration in the country, which is a theme we've returned to again and again on this programme, is that the more experience you have of foreign neighbours and foreign-born friends, the less freaked out by it you will be. But then again, of course, you know, Farage will marry foreigners or go out with foreigners while continuing to tell you that they're a threat to your very way of life. It's 3 minutes after 11. You're absolutely right, Sam. He gave one biscuit to the Brit, James, and then he points at the immigrant and says to the British, quotes, worker, he wants your biscuit. It sounds like a trivial correction, but I think it's pertinent in relation to asylum seekers who may be coming here, as they literally have nothing when they come here and are hoping to make something for themselves. And of course, the pot is constantly being reduced for them and most British people by the people at the top. Is this a phone-in? Why is it easier to get people angry about asylum seekers in a hotel living on £1 a day than it is about Tory donors buying yachts as a consequence of contracts they receive for PPE that wasn't fit for purpose? Why is that? So I know what I get angrier about. Why is that? You look at, and it's not just the people whose names you know. There are examples of businesses that had no turnover at all, securing a couple of COVID contracts, not really delivering on what they were expected to deliver, and literally by the end of the year buying a mansion buying like an £8 million house in the Cotswolds. And that has literally all come out of the public purse. All of that money has come out of the tax take. But I guess that you don't have people online constantly agitating against the reality of that perceived corruption, because it's chicken and egg. Would it work if it did? If some self-appointed crusader with a made-up name actually went in on the reality of cronyism and COVID contracts and dedicated their entire life, and okay, we'd have to let them crowdfund because they got to pay their bills and their hotel bar tabs. So would it work if there was an online army dedicated to directing public rage towards the people who deserve it? Or is there something more atavistic going on? Anyway, if you're just joining us, guess what we're doing? We're having a sensible conversation about immigration. You know, the kind of thing that they say never happens. Why can't we just have a sensible conversation about immigration? And I'll tell you where it's led me after an hour. It's led me to the conclusion that the only way you defuse the sort of tensions that we see and the sort of rhetoric that the only way you do it is by talking more and more and more about the benefits, not even the necessity, but the benefits of immigration. And you can do it from either end of the telescope. I mean, who does that? Who in the British media does it? I've been very slack at this. Jack talked earlier about feeling a bit fraudulent. I think I have subconsciously stopped doing it through a sort of form of, if you like, fatigue. I think that's what a lot of the online hate is designed to do, to just shut down, either actually silence voices of decency or just bombard them into a point of fatigue. So who would you think? Off the top of your head now, you can text me this or you can WhatsApp it to 0345 6060 973. Off the top of your head, who is the most high-profile person in the UK who routinely speaks about the benefits of immigration? Because if I asked you to make a list of the people who routinely speak about the negatives, we would be here until long after the end of Sheila Fogarty's show. But if I asked you now to send me the names of people who routinely speak about the positives of immigration into the United Kingdom, whose names would be on that list? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Nick has nailed something that I failed to nail a little earlier. He says, James, sensible conversation to the far right means let me say racist things, but don't call me a racist. He's right, isn't he? So why don't you like those workers? Well, they're foreign. Oh, but that makes you racist. You like that person there because they look like you, and even as they're throwing bricks at the police, but you don't like that person there who's caring for your nan? Carers are interesting as well, because Two little vignettes. One involved a 17-year-old girl who was interviewed on the BBC on Monday, and she spoke about how, as they were cowering in the house, hoping that the mob wouldn't succeed in kicking in their front door, which they were trying to do at the time, they then turned their attention to the car that was parked outside the house, and they wrote it off, which meant that her mother, even if she'd plucked up the courage to leave the house and go to work, her mother couldn't go to work caring for a profoundly disabled child on the other side of town. So hitting care workers right in the vulnerable areas, as it were. And then there was another story I saw online about a car being set on fire. And it turned out, when the owner of the car returned, that the rioters had torched a car that was owned by a carer who had just come to the end of a 14-hour shift. So how do you have a sensible conversation when the insensible are everywhere? Who are these people? Who are the people that you think speak regularly about a lot of Scottish politicians coming in? But these, I mean, think about if you were to name them on the same scale as famous people like your Farages or your Bravermans, your Patels or your Cleverleys, your Yaxley Lennons or whoever it may be, the lad from Lewis who wasn't Lewis, all of these. I mean, what is the list? Who are the people who have a profile comparable to the ones who never shut up about the negatives? So Stephen Flynn gets a lot of mentions. Humza Yousaf gets a lot of mentions. Caroline Lucas and Zoe Gardner. Naomi Smith from the Best for Britain organisation. I had a lovely time with her on Tuesday recording a podcasts that you can listen to. But these are not, with respect to all of these people, some of whom are my friends, they are not what you would call necessarily household names. Some of them aren't even household names in their own households. George Monbiot. Jeremy Corbyn gets a couple of mentions. I think that's fair. He speaks about the benefits of immigration in a way that few politicians do. A few of you kindly referencing the humble presenter of this programme, but Lineker, I guess, Vorders, James O'Brien, Carol Vorderman and Gary Lineker. That's it. That's the Liberal elite. Right there. Every columnist on the Mail, every columnist on the Telegraph, every columnist on the Express, every columnist on the Sun, everyone who writes for the Spectator, everyone on GBBs, everyone on Talk TV, colleagues here who very much lean towards the right. The list is absolutely enormous. And who's on the other side? Me and Lineker. Carol's got a show now, so she counts. But where are the massive media platforms occupied by people who speak about the positives of immigration? But we've got to have a sensible conversation because it's so one-sided. It's so one-sided. And then I get messages from people who live in, I don't know, the middle of Surrey, telling me that I'm out of touch because I live in London. Mate, have you ever been to London? Have you ever been to London? If you were minded to be perturbed by the colour of a fellow passenger's skin on public transport or the ethnicity of the person who is serving you in a shop or treating you in a doctor's surgery or booking you into A&E, you couldn't live in London. This idea that people who speak up or speak out against racism are somehow insulated from the real consequences of immigration is the stupidest element of this entire conversation. Oh, James lives in leafy Chiswick. Wait, for a start, he doesn't. But have you ever been to Chiswick? You can't get to Chiswick without going through Hammersmith. And Hammersmith is one of the most gloriously diverse and multicultural corners of our capital. This nonsensical notion that people who've never been to London in fact, they've never gone further than the end of their own cul-de-sacs, think that those of us who speak about the benefits of immigration have got no idea what it's really like. Why don't you go and live in Rotherham? Well, do you know what happens when immigration communities arrive in a new country? People like you compel them to stick together. People who put up posters, as happened in Birmingham a few years ago, saying things like, vote Labour if you want an N-word for a neighbour. What would you do if you'd come here to help rebuild Britain after the Second World War and you saw posters like that in your area? You'd try to make sure that you live with people who look like you. And then when that happens, and when parts of towns become community hubs for newly arrived ethnicities, all of the people that didn't want them here in the first place start complaining that they want to live next door to each other instead of living next door to a knuckle-dragging racist like you. But it's those of us who live in London in the middle of the diversity, those of us who celebrate it, those of us with a Muslim mayor, we're the ones who are out of touch and insulated from the real reality of what immigration is actually like. Mate, you are so stupid so dense, I suspect light bends around you. But please keep the messages coming and of course, love to the family. 12 minutes after 11 is the time. Sanj is in Coventry. Sanj, let's have a sensible conversation about immigration.
We can try.
Go on.
I think all this comes down to, for me, is there's something happening with British identity that's been dying for many, many years now. And every now and again it bubbles up into this thing, which is, well, what's really going on? The only bit of British identity, or rather I'm going to say English identity, that I think I can actually think, yes, that is English identity, is the phrase, I'd say, we are better than them.
Yeah.
That's it. That, for me, epitomises English identity.
Innate superiority, inherent superiority
Absolutely.
Of the, quotes, indigenous. It's the politics of apartheid.
And if you cut an English person open, I think that's what you find at their core. But there's a section of our society that hasn't, or actually a huge number of people in this country, who don't actually consciously know that that's what they're losing, but it's disappearing and they don't know what to do.
Because if you've spent your whole life enjoying privilege, then equality feels like oppression. And if you're living in one of the most deprived areas of England and someone's telling you that you're privileged, you're going to go nuts. I completely understand. You're privileged because you're white and you haven't got a pot to pee in. It's not helpful.
But there's something you said about the cookie thing, the biscuit
Yes.
thing. Why don't we look at the person with all the biscuits? It doesn't matter about the person with all the biscuits. I believe I'm a true Englishman. I know I am better than the person sitting opposite me. I am better than the other person because they are the other.
Which makes it even more enraging that they appear to have well, in the case of successfully integrated immigrants or their descendants, they appear to have a better life than me. And in the case of asylum seekers living in a hotel, I had a caller yesterday who said, I get very angry because the lights are on. And I can't afford to turn my lights on, and the lights in that asylum centre. I mean, it's a fairly exaggerated position, but it encapsulates some of what you're describing.
Well, as a brown person who was born in this country, who's known nothing but this country,
yes,
I've always felt I can't be English, and it's recently occurred to me just over the last few
as opposed to British, Sam, as opposed to British.
I am British. Yeah, I am absolutely British because I don't sense this thing with Scottish people. Because Scottish people don't seem to have ingrained in them that you are better than them. Because they are the them.
Maybe it's because so much of those impulses have been directed towards turning on each other through sectarianism, through the sort of Catholic Protestant history that they have. I don't know. That might have contributed to it. If you're too busy biting chunks out of each other, if you're of the chunk biting mindset, then you're less likely to turn upon the new arrivals.
Well, within the United Kingdom, it's always seemed to me, as a kind of outsider, that the English are superior to the Scottish. Or that's how the perception is. Of course they are.
Yeah, so you can tell it from the nicknames and the language.
Yeah, the Englishman, Irishman, Scottish jokes. The Scottishman was never on top.
We take it back to Brexit. I know that I sometimes seem to do that when it isn't necessary, but the reason why they thought they would be able to negotiate something phenomenal was because they were English. They honestly thought people like David Davis and Jacob Rees-Mogg and Nigel Farage and all the rest, and Boris Johnson, crucially, they all thought, you could tell they came pretty close to saying it, didn't they? They need us more than we need them. No. Third countries, the way third countries are treated, that won't apply to us. Why not? Because we're English. They genuinely believed that it was some sort of magic spell that could...
Absolutely. But what I'd really like to come back to is the people, the white working class, who in my dad's day, when they worked at the factories, the Asian people were put in their little group, usually working in the foundry, the harder jobs, and the white people in those slightly had the better jobs. It was always the way, and there was segregation within the factories. It did. I mean, I'm talking about the 60s. And that's how it worked. And the English then felt it was okay because we are still better than them. We may be really far down in the country, but we are still better than them. That's starting to change. Even immigrants are coming over and making something of themselves relatively quickly. The reason, we can't integrate... If a brown person integrates... It's bad because they become successful and they're integrated.
Can't get much more integrated than mayor of the capital city, can you? Which is makes it very odd that Sadiq Khan retains a particular place of hatred among all the people who claim that they want immigrants to integrate.
Yes, but we're at this point that I don't know what the solution is.
I know what the beginning of the solution is. It's to hear more from people like you and less from people like Uncle Nige. And also, of course, for people like me, to I'm afraid, grow a pair and start returning to the territory where we are pointing this stuff out all the time, instead of doing what the Labour Party has done and almost accept that the ecosystem demands negativity towards immigration and demands promises to reduce it, even as the statistics show us that reducing it is hurting us. We're going to train our own. The Labour Party have fallen into that trap. It used to be so many Sands. You're a legend, mate. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend. A lot of love for you coming in on the lines. But a lot of the stuff now, I sometimes wish I'd kept a diary for the last 20 years and just tracked the movement, because a lot of stuff that would once have been a preserve of a borderline far-right radio phone-in host, that phrase, we've got to train our own. And most decent people would hear that and think, well, that sends a disgusting message to your Asian doctor. We've got to train our own. What message do you think you are sending to that doctor over there who's come here from India or whose parents came here from Pakistan or Nigeria? I mean, we've got to train our own because you can treat my verrucas, but I don't really want you here. That's what the rhetoric of saying we can train our own does. All right? If you want to train your own, just do it. And if it reduces the number of people coming here, then so be it. But don't say it while they're cleaning your backside, that we should be training our own to do it. And what was once the preserve of the fact, there used to be stuff about accents and foreign languages up on the walls in emergency department. Why are there so many foreign languages up on the wall in emergency departments? And you just sort of think, well, sometimes it takes people a couple of years to learn the language of the country that they've arrived in. Farage talking about people talking foreign on trains and then having to admit that his own children speak foreign at home, because if English is not your first language, the chances are you're bilingual, and being bilingual is good. Highly unlikely to end up bilingual if you're a product of the British educational system these days. Less likely, in fact, than you were, I think, 20 years ago. So you've got to do it. And then the conversation about, well, what's the bad immigration? That's easy. The bad immigration is the people whose applications have been processed and they don't have a right to be here. The bad immigration are the people that, and you can't say abuse hospitality because it's your own home. But criminals who don't have a right to be here are fair game for negative rhetoric. But how we have allowed negative rhetoric about the tiny, tiny, tiny proportion of foreign-born people in this country who are not possessed of a right to be here, to encompass absolutely everybody is a source of national disgrace. And it ain't over yet. And it leads to the riots. You keep feeding people xenophobic lies. What do you expect them to do? Which is why, as the dust settles, please God, I think that the responsibility for these rights, and of course, how many times have I said to you, if the media grows a conscience, if the client media in this country, the race-baiting media in this country, the newspapers priming daily, if they could just begin to push back against what they've created, then we might just have a chance. It is 23 minutes after 11 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Here's an interesting one, because the language is so important, isn't it? And sometimes I miss stuff that I shouldn't miss. Morning, James, writes Kenny. Tell me I'm not integrated into this society. Arrived 2005. Joined the army. 4 medals, including the Queen's Jubilee Medal. Injured in Afghan. 9 major surgeries. Went to university in Gloucestershire. Bachelor of Science in Cybersecurity. Masters in Cybersecurity. Written 3 books. Now a tech leader. 3 boys born in the UK. Playing local football. Now tell me, as an immigrant, that I am not integrated. Mate, you're not indigenous. So you integrate, you become Mayor of London, for example, but you're not indigenous. So that's why the word indigenous is enjoying a bit of a comeback at the moment, because when people say integrate, they're lying. Can't get more integrated than being elected mayor of our capital city 3 times, more times than anybody else in history, which sounds impressive until you remember we've only actually had 3 mayors. So why bring the word indigenous into the conversation? Oh, that's easy, James. I've reintroduced the word indigenous into my racist rhetoric because all of the people that I said needed to integrate have actually integrated now. They are, teachers and doctors and nurses, and they do, retail jobs, service sector jobs, completely bloody integrated. Mayor of bloody London. So I now have to start saying indigenous, because when I said they needed to integrate more, I was lying, because that's all that I ever do. It's incredible, right? And when you see it sometimes, like that, in that moment right there, you see, oh God, that's why they say indigenous, because they were lying when they said integrated. Kenny makes the point. I don't know whether you were making it intentionally or not, mate, but you've made it incredibly. I couldn't be more integrated. But you're not indigenous. So that's next. Just set a little alarm every time you hear the word indigenous in that kind of context. In many ways, it's meaningless anyway, depending on how far back you want to trace your own family tree. But there it is. So how do we have a sensible conversation about immigration without ending up at the conclusion that it will be dedicated almost entirely to talking of the positives? Stephen is in Exeter. Stephen, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for having us on.
Hello.
I just wanted to share my experience growing up, really going from very much anti-immigration to now pro-immigration.
Yeah.
And it wasn't really that someone had a conversation with me. It was basically from my experiences. So growing up in County Durham, I was always told that my opportunities were limited because people were coming over here and taking those jobs and those opportunities away from me.
Yes.
And then I moved.
Where are you from? Are you from Sunderland?
From County Durham.
Okay.
I lived in Chesley Street.
I only asked because Sunderland popped up earlier, and I've had a couple of messages from people describing the deindustrialisation being a crucial part of that sense of jobs being taken away by foreigners when really they'd been taken away by technology and economics. But it's easier to process the idea that it's been taken away by an immigrant.
Well, yeah, it's just easier to tell someone that rather than educate yourself and actually learn about the true factors why opportunities are limited. And it wasn't until I moved to Exeter with my wife and got a job in a supermarket until I actually changed my view, because I work with a lot of Polish people.
Okay.
And at first the word clashes between us, and I think that was because I had an inherent view on those people. But as I continued working in the supermarket and more time, I learned that actually they're some of the hardest people that I've ever worked with. And so I just think you can't really have conversations with these people. But what you can do is suggest to them, well, go and try and work with some, or go and put yourself in a position where you have to converse with these people, converse with migrants, converse with immigrants, and then you can actually see that they are.
And that's why that pincer movement of rhetoric exists, isn't it? Because, you can say to a middle-class bloke on the radio that he's got no idea what immigration is really like, he doesn't know how it affects communities. But the people saying that are the people who really are insulated from it, people like you used to be. The people who the more experience you have of living in a diverse community, the less freaked out you are by diversity, full stop. Unless you are a kind of deep-rooted ideological bigot. And if you are, then, you've probably got a column in The Spectator.
Well, I think it's comfort zones as well. I think once I was took out of my comfort zone and I had to move down here and get a new job, I started seeing these people for exactly what they are, and they're hard-working, honest people. Just like myself, I come from a working-class background, which a lot of people in North East or where I'm from are. And people who come from like different countries like Poland and wherever it is, it doesn't really matter where they're from. They're coming here to make a better life for themselves, and that's, I look at these people in Sunderland rioting, and I think a lot of you probably on a day-to-day basis are hard-working people like myself, and what you don't understand is that those who are coming over here are just trying to do the same thing.
Was it a slow process? Did you just suddenly realise one day, oh yeah, I don't feel that way anymore, because it's not a sort of faceless threat to me that I'm thinking of when I hear the word immigrant? It's Pavel, who I sit next to at work. Or do you see what I mean?
Yeah, but I was told that these people were the problem, but I never actually had any experiences with them. I think until you're face to face with, in my case, a Polish person, and you actually converse with them, you learn that, well, actually these are decent people. They aren't the enemy. They are part of what makes this country sustainable and great. And,
people, younger listeners may need a little reminder if they're thinking, no, Polish people aren't the problem. You go back to the referendum, around the days of the referendum, Polish, Romanian, Eastern European, the way that they were spoken about by people like Farage was absolutely despicable. And of course, it's just the spotlight of hatred that shifts. It's never the nature of the hatred that changes. It's always identical. They just shift targets accordingly. So, Stephen, that's a lovely call. Thank you. I think we should have sensible conversations about immigration more often. I wonder if you're one of the people who thought that we never had sensible conversations about immigration because we didn't accept the idea that people have constantly been given free houses or preferential treatment, or asylum seekers are all living in Claridges. How are you finding the actual sensible conversations about immigration from all sorts of people? I wonder if you're enjoying it as much as you thought you would when you cheered the politicians telling you that we never have sensible conversations about immigration. I'll tell you what we'll do after the headlines. We'll have some more conversation, shall we? Some more sensible conversation about immigration. But first, Thomas Watts is here with your headlines. 11:34 is the time. I'm going to plug 2 full disclosures today, possibly 3, because we put out 2 full disclosures while I was away, and they're crackers, actually. I don't know. Does it make much difference to take up whether I plug them on the show or not? It probably doesn't, to be honest. But we did one with Robin Asquith, who is one of the most lovely people you could ever hope to meet in a million years. Your relationship with Robin is going to depend almost entirely on your age. So some younger listeners will know him from his recent appearances on television. Most recently, I think, in the Madame Blanc mysteries, Sally Lindsay's rather splendid Channel 5 TV series. And you might know him from his work with the League of Gentlemen lads as well. But of course, my age or slightly older will know him from that sort of saucy stroke smutty genre of filmmaking that was remarkably prevalent in the 1970s. People like me who love the work of Lindsay Anderson, the film director Lindsay Anderson, and particularly the film If, which was judged to be one of the finest British films ever made, will know that his acting chops are incredible as well. So he was my guest last week, and of course I wasn't here, so I didn't play you any. I'm going to play you a little bit of that shortly, but also this week's guest, this was an absolute corker. So if you don't like football, but you do like interesting conversations, I promise you that my full disclosure interview with Martin O'Neill, the Nottingham Forest legend and, of course, manager of Northern Ireland and Ireland football clubs, international teams, as well as various clubs. It was a beautiful conversation with a really lovely, thoughtful man who has a fascinating story to tell. That's what full disclosure is all about, really. And we've hit a couple of absolutely amazing seams in recent months of guests who just have amazing stories to tell. Russell Watson was a joy, a real joy. There's not been a duff one, except one. And the other one that came out while I was away was James Graham, the playwright, who is arguably the finest playwright of his generation, and has tackled. He grew up in the same part of Nottinghamshire as 30 Pence Lee Anderson, in a mining community, and somehow from the same soil that Anderson sprouted from, someone as compassionate and insightful as James Graham, who's written plays that you'll know about football, about Brexit, about done the TV stuff as well, film stuff as well. He's an absolute legend. And that was an incredible conversation as well about some of the stuff that we're talking about here when it comes to deindustrialisation, the consequences, of course, of Margaret Thatcher's policies, all of the things that would pop up if you were to have that so-called sensible conversation about immigration, which we're having because they keep telling us to. So we're having a sensible conversation about immigration. But so far, none of the people who loudly insist that we never have sensible conversations about immigration, none of them have rung in. A couple of texts, but none of the people who insist endlessly that we are constantly avoiding sensible conversations about immigration have rung in. And no, I am never, Rob and others, I'm never going to reveal the single episode of Full Disclosure with which I wasn't very happy, ever. Unless you come to one of my book signings and ask me after I've had a glass of wine. 11:38 is the time. Kay's in Ruislip. Kay, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
So I didn't know I was a daughter of an immigrant until I saw it in the headline.
What do you mean?
The word immigrant wasn't really something that I heard when I was growing up.
Okay.
I was thought, my parents came over here. My granddad came over here back in the sort of the 60s. My great-great-great-great-grandfather, we found a medal of his because he was in the Second World War. My grandfather came over here. He worked. We're talking about integration. I am from a Punjabi Sikh family.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you know about the Sikh, some sort of in terms of the pillars of faith,
yes.
some, working hard, and is
No,
one
no,
of the
no,
main
no,
pillars.
no,
So they
no,
weren't
no.
taught.
That's a British value.
Yes, and it's intrinsic, right? 'Cause we were ruled by the British for a long time. The British were in India, right? So for me, growing up in this country, I never felt like an immigrant until I was told I was an immigrant.
And when would you date
So
that to? When do you think that started to kick in?
I think so. I came I grew up here. I went to school here. I went to university. I've worked in this country for many, many years. And I think probably in the last 20, maybe 10 to 20 years, I've started hearing that word more. And recently, more and more on the headlines. I remember politics were quite boring when I was growing up. They always. Do
you remember the Cones hotline?
Yeah,
When John Major felt that. Yeah, sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, politics was the way I think I wanted politics to be serious. We didn't want sensationalized politics and them to be on the front pages all the time. And maybe I'm wrong in that. So my story is this: my grandfather came here, my parents came here. We talk about integration. My father and my grandparents and my uncles all wore turbans. They were told they weren't going to get any jobs until they removed those turbans.
Yes, of course.
Well, if you're a Sikh, that's quite a thing. So they had to shave their beards, remove their turbans to get employment. The way that we cooked was different. We had to change. Our mothers, we had to dress differently to integrate. We learnt the language. We integrated as much as we can. I've got family members who've married to, non-Sikh people, male and female. So we've got cultural diversity in that sense. And I think for me, I think the main thing for me is that having contributed to the country, working here, and I have a child, I wasn't able to afford a house where I grew up. So I moved out of the area into the Shire. And this is where it becomes really interesting, and this is where having a conversation is really important. So because I went to university here, I had I love the indie scene. I worked in the music industry. I worked in the media industry, right? So I moved into it's not very posh. Everybody else thought it was posh, but a predominantly white neighborhood. And I kid you not, the first day I moved in, I had a retired police officer run across the road from me and just said, "Oh, I suppose you're going to change the drive and park 16 cars there."
You're going to what?
I said, "Why would I do?" You're going to,
change the drive.
Change the drive, put block paving up, and put 16 cars there. And I said, "Why would I do that?"
Because you're Asian.
Because you're Asian. I said, "No, I'm not." I said, "I have no intention of doing that. I'm a daughter of a farmer. I love my garden." Right. So that happened, and then we started doing a little bit of building. The next door neighbour, who had the English flag up on a pole.
Yeah.
Oh, we don't allow any of that. And so I'm not doing anything. I'm just literally. I suppose you're going to knock chimneys down. I'm not knocking chimney down. I want a fireplace. I'm not changing the house in any way.
It's your house.
I needed to make it habitable. It's my house, right?
Yeah.
And then that happened. And then 2 doors down, having looked at all the bylaws, etc., I lit a bonfire, and the lady came running out. We don't do those kind of things around here.
So it would be very difficult in a court of law to prove that this was motivated by your ethnicity, and yet
exactly
the use of the we and round here. Yeah,
we around here, and I felt it, and I had to. And you know what? I've been in that community now for 12 years. Every Christmas, just like my grandmother did it to Mrs. Sickham, who lived next door to us, I gave a Christmas card and a box of chocolates or a box of biscuits to my neighbour, and very straight down the line English couple, lovely. Sure. But it took, I kid you not, it took 10 years before he returned the card to me. And it was a conversation I had. He said, we were over the wall. He said, "Oh, hi, how you do?" Slowly, but over those years, what are you doing? "Oh, I've just gone to a Rolling Stones gig." Yeah. "What? You like the Rolling Stones?" I'm like, "Yeah, I do." "What have you done? What are you doing over summer?" "I'm taking my daughter to see her godfather, who's from Arran." "What? Yeah. So what, is he Indian?" I went, "No, he's from Arran." True, moved from Arran, is a Glaswegian, blues you like,
So this is absolutely fascinating. No, because what you're describing precisely the sort of people who are changeable. But as you say, it takes 10 years. And the sensible conversation about immigration, you are that conversation in human form.
That conversation.
In human form.
That conversation.
Yes.
Yeah, and my neighbour now, we chat. He now doesn't feel threatened and isn't. Now we don't have people.
Kay, I'm enjoying your. But if
there is a but.
Push comes to shove,
to get to the but.
Yeah. Well, I'm only hurrying you because we're short of time. The but is. I don't mean you.
The but is when I came here, and I remember distinctly growing up. I grew up in West London, Southall. I remember the riots.
Yeah.
And my uncles having to defend. We weren't allowed to cross the bridge. We were told, don't cross the bridge because this is what's there, right? The but is that I was in France for a while. I came back and I had so many messages from my white English friends. Are you okay? Are you okay? I'm like, what is this? And there's that feeling. So when we're talking about rights, I've grown up with this. It's been there all the time, and I've done everything I can to try and change people's minds.
And you will, and you have.
I've been integrating.
But some of the minds you've changed, if they were to make a sweeping generalisation of the kind that are now increasingly commonplace, they would respond by saying, "I don't mean you."
Yeah, and that's not. But we're all. That's all of us.
I don't.
We all know somebody. There's an Englishman who knows somebody like me throughout the country.
No, yes, I do.
My best friend's Asian.
Yeah, and that's the weird thing, isn't it? If the particularly recent development, these endless screeds of footage online which show crimes being committed by people of colour from anywhere in the world, and endless screeds of them which are completely designed to undermine the reality of your life, the reality of you, and to encourage the belief that everybody who's brown or everybody who's black must be a criminal, or must be violent, or must be suspect. And it doesn't matter how loud the invitation is. It's always resistible. Kay, thank you. 11:48 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We'll dive back into this shortly. The sensible conversation about immigration. I think we'll make it a regular feature of the show. And then next time you hear someone say, you can never have a sensible conversation about immigration, you can say, well, have you listened to James O'Brien on LBC? According to some statistics that he shared yesterday, I think he has the largest audience share of any. I just checked with the producer. That graph they showed us yesterday, was it the largest audience share of any talk programme on the whole of British radio in this time slot? In terms of audience share as opposed to reach. It was, wasn't it? Including the BBC. That's incredible. Well done, you. And you, Keith. Great work. Nice one. Well done, Emily. Well done, Hassan. Well done, everybody. I take a small scintilla of the credit for that. But anyway, so the most, what's that you say, the most popular talk show in terms of market share on the whole of British speech radio, in this time slot, obviously, they have sensible conversations about immigration all the time. How could you possibly have missed them? That's what you could say. And he also plugs his podcast all the time. And here is last week's Full Disclosure interview with one of my just so showbiz. Robin Asquith has got more anecdotes about famous people than you have had hot dinners. And he delivers them with so much charm and verve. It's lovely. But what I try to do in Full Disclosure sometimes is just if I can, just to dig a little bit below the surface.
My friends were Richard O'Sullivan, George Layton, Robert Powell, Dennis Waterman. Richard Beckinsale wasn't really part of that club, but he was obviously as successful.
And going up for similar parts and same parts sometimes.
But we'd walk down the street, no one would know who we were.
Really?
There was no social, nobody was that impressed by fame. So we wanted to work. Can I swear once?
Yeah, of course.
Because it is it's
important. It's contextually important.
It's contextually important, and it explains how things were.
Yeah.
I was seeing, not my girlfriend at the time, but my friend Linda Hayden, the actress, gone seeing Coventry at the Belgrade, where she was appearing with Paul Jones. And my car broke down on Shepherd's Bush Green, and there was the Odeon, and it had Robin Asquith in Confessions of a Window Cleaner with a queue wrapped round the block, and even had a sort of ladder with a sort of rubber version of me. It's hanging there, right? Now, my car's broken down, and I lived in Richmond at the time, and I thought, oh, Jesus Christ, I can't. And flagged down a taxi, and the bloke pulled up and said, get in. And I said, I haven't got any money on me. I said, I've got some at home. He said, I'm not taking you. I said, well, I've got loads of money at home where I live in Richmond. I'm not taking you, mate. You could be anyone. And I went, oh, no. I said, look, that's me there. And he looked at me and went, in your dreams, and drove off. So that's how fame.
So there's a weird dichotomy then, isn't there? With did you like being when people did start recognising you a lot? Did you enjoy that?
It was different.
Why? How?
I don't know. It was different. Like now, people are obsessed with it.
Yeah.
You know, even coming on the train today, you could see young people who now watch everything.
Yes.
And I am having this sort of strange renaissance at the moment, and so we're going, and you can see them going like this, and that's it's not really didn't really interest me at all.
You just want to be admired by your peers, and
I
want
wanted
the approval of people like Lindsay Anderson.
Yeah, and I wanted to enjoy that sort of work. I mean, nothing has given me greater pleasure in recent years than Mark Gatiss saying, well, you know what I'm going to say, when he got the Olivier Award, saying, who was your greatest influence? He said, Robin Asquith doing Arturo Ui. Nothing.
Did you cry?
Yeah.
Because I would have done if that was. Yeah.
I mean, you think, Jesus Christ. There I was at Darlington Hippodrome.
Yeah.
And there was a 16-year-old. I mean, I would love that. I said to Steve Pemberton the other day, I said, I would love there to be a tag to that story, that he'd come to the stage door and said, could have an autograph, and I told him to f*** off. I wish that, that would have made it even better story.
I don't know whether I needed to be there. The more I listen to that, I just a very occasional chuckle and attempt to. It's a lovely interview, it really is. You can get it, of course, on Global Player. And I'll give you a little heads up on this week's guest shortly as well. But back to the sensible conversation about immigration. Nikki's in Gillingham. Nikki, what would you like to say?
Hiya, James.
Hello.
I'm so glad you're having this conversation, because what I need from you is like more arguments to use. I was teaching at school, and we teach British values, and the minute
Go on.
you'll get some child just spouting nonsense that they've heard. Whatever it is, take back Britain or whatever, and I don't know how to shut them down, and that really frustrates me. But I wanted to pick up on something you said the other day. I think it was Monday.
Right.
About, you said, was it 70 or 80% of people seeking asylum will have it granted?
If they ever get
right?
if they ever get their applications processed.
Yeah, but my concern is what happens then, because if they get granted asylum genuinely, there's such a scarcity of resources now that has been created, obviously, by the government, and they distract people from that by setting us amongst ourselves. But, what is going to... is there going to be? This is what I mean. I don't have the
statistic you need. The statistic you need, I think, if I've understood your question correctly, is the relationship between taking out and putting into society. Now, I'm a big fan of the welfare state and the NHS being free at the point of care, but asylum seekers, should their application be successful, have to pay a premium to access the NHS, like all immigrants do now. And the statistics show us that people that come here and work, will have a healthier relationship with the economy than people who like to use the word indigenous a lot of the time. So in terms of resources improve according to tax take, according to the Inland Revenue, and the sooner these people go to work, the sooner they start contributing to the pot from which we improve resources.
Yeah, because the ironic thing is that the children that are coming out with this nonsense, they're never going to. They're never going to work a day in their life. They just,
Well, I mean, I hope you're wrong, but you speak of what you know. That's the problem. I mean, and that's what you need. It is always the relatively simple pins, tiny little pins, can pop the biggest balloons, Nikki. As long as you know where the pins are.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Okay. Yeah, thank you, James.
So no, you're more than welcome. And of course, the other problem with our current asylum system is that it prevents people from working while they're waiting to have their application processed. So there's got to be ways in which that could probably be improved. But I'm afraid the Labour Party, nowhere near as badly as the Conservative Party, but still badly, they're playing to the wrong galleries. They're still playing to the gallery that keeps insisting you can't have sensible conversations about immigration, which makes me wonder what this is. Joe's in Tottenham. Joe, what would you like to say?
Hello, good morning, James. Thanks for having me on the program.
You're very welcome.
Right, so I just want to go a little back into history. If you remember, as long as I can remember, if I'm correct, because I'm from West Africa, from Ghana to be precise, some 30, 40 years ago, we used to have the British Council in Ghana where the British would come in and get skilled workers and bring them to the UK to work.
Right.
And then when we joined the, the European Union, all of this stopped. So for me, I don't think people talking about us coming from being immigrants is something that they have to take without understanding.
So the relationship between the Commonwealth and these islands is supposedly one of parity, as in you are not coming over here, as it were. You might be physically coming over here, but you're actually just moving between equal partners in a Commonwealth.
Exactly, that makes sense. So when you look at the Commonwealth law, it says that any Commonwealth citizen can live in any Commonwealth country, and they can live there. And after 3 years, they are entitled to apply for a position in office and all of that. But I don't know of any single Commonwealth person in the UK who's been given a position of office here, which I believe most people who come from Commonwealth only want to come here to work and just to make an honest living.
Do you mean an elected position? We had a Canadian. Is Canada in the? We had a Canadian governor of the Bank of England, didn't we?
Yeah, but in all perspective, if we talk of, I'm
so ignorant of the Commonwealth. That's kind of the problem you're describing, isn't it? But you mean you can't be what you can't see, and you don't see people like you having their Commonwealth status properly represented and reflected.
Exactly, because being a Commonwealth country, being a Commonwealth citizen in this country, the only right you have is to vote. That's it. The only right you have is to vote. But apart from that, you have no other entitlement as being a Commonwealth citizen. And to think of the fact that the Commonwealth countries are contributing to the wealth of the Great Britain and all these European countries, they're not contributing nothing.
And there was actually, I don't know if you noticed it. I don't know if you noticed it, but there was a rhetorical flourish in the run-up to the referendum that we would be able to replace all of the people that would leave as a consequence of Brexit with people from the Commonwealth with whom we apparently had much more in common. But that seems to have gone very quiet subsequently, like an awful lot of the Brexit-related claims have. Joe, thank you. It's coming up to 12 noon. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I really enjoyed that. We're going to have more sensible conversations about immigration, I think, moving forward. But I want to have a completely different conversation next. And by completely different, I really do mean completely different. In fact, if you're relatively new to the programme, you may not have heard us do a subject in this kind of territory, but there's a story in the news today that has really made me wonder about how in the modern world you can demonstrate romantic interest in a colleague without getting into trouble. 3 minutes after 12. I didn't do Idiot's Corner really in the last hour because I didn't know how helpful it would be if we were having a sensible conversation about immigration. But there were a couple of predictable messages about housing and priorities on housing lists. So I just thought I'd read this out because that nice lady towards the end who wanted to know the facts you need, the statistics you need to have sensible conversations about immigration. Here's another good one. More than 5,000 refugee households were classed as homeless between October and December 2023 in England, 4 times as many as in the same period in 2022. So still well over 1,000 in 2022. But these refugees became homeless after gaining asylum, so they were no longer entitled to Home Office accommodation. So, the next time someone tells you they're getting a house and you're not, then you don't need to ask, why are 5,000 refugee households, so I don't know what the full number of people would be, why are they being classed as homeless if they're being given Holmes. I'll wait. 4 minutes after 12 is time. And thinking, speaking of things that popped up quite interestingly, I don't think in a million years you would guess correctly what newspaper this letter has been published in. All right, are you ready? Although I didn't vote for Nigel Farage, I have to accept him as my constituency MP. I have emailed him on both his addresses 4 times requesting confirmation of when he will hold a clinic in Clacton so I can get an appointment to see him. I have not received even an automated reply. I telephoned Reform Head Office to no avail and spoke to a member of staff at the Houses of Parliament to be told, you voted him in. Brackets, I didn't, close brackets, and that they can do nothing to make him respond to his constituents. That letter has been submitted to a national newspaper by Susan Larwood of Clacton-on-Sea in Essex, and I don't think you will guess which newspaper it is. Well, I've kind of spoiled it now by saying it's the paper you would least expect, but you can still play. You can still guess which newspaper that letter has been published in. 5 minutes after 12 is the time. Okay, I am about to make a fool of myself. Probably, but not definitely. 10 years ago, if I had waded into this conversation, I definitely would have made a fool of myself. How big an addict to the programme would you need to be to remember the call that completely changed the way I, as a man born in the 70s, we were born. Oh no, that's the 50s. The call that I took a long time ago that just changed the way I thought about what you might call romantic matters in the workplace. 2 things, actually, but one call in particular from a female lawyer who described being a young junior lawyer in the city and working at weekends with her boss, her superior, who was quite an awkward man. He wasn't socially comfortable, and they were, by which I mean he wasn't a sort of, Swiss Tony type of character, but they were sharing a lift one Saturday because they were wearing less formal clothes than they would usually wear. And he said to her, I really like the way you fill those jeans. And I think I needed her to explain to me why that was so offensive. And when she did, I felt the building blocks of my opinions being completely rearranged. Because, of course, to say you look nice in those jeans, or those jeans are nice, it's very different from saying, I love the way you fill those jeans. Because if you say, I love the way you fill those jeans, you're telling this young woman that you're thinking about her naked bottom. And this woman explained it to me in a way that, as I say, it happens occasionally on the show. We usually call them penny drop moments. It completely changed the way I thought about things. And as I began to think, Dan got it. Dan in Sandbach. Well played, mate. Crikey, I'll send you a copy of How to Be Right if you didn't already have one. I then noticed something, sadly, in this building, when I heard a man older than me say of a female colleague in her presence, oh, if I were 20 years younger. And I wouldn't have clocked that as being obnoxious or offensive prior to that conversation with that young woman. Well, she wasn't a young woman when she spoke to me. It had happened 20 or 30 years previously, which I think speaks directly to the impact that things like that can have on women, about which men of my generation and older knew nothing. I like to think, albeit that misogynists like Andrew Tate are currently undoing an awful lot of the good that has been done in the ensuing years, the conversation has shifted rather a lot. Because, of course, if you say to a young woman as a man, particularly a man in a position of seniority, oh, if I were 20 years younger, you are doing 2 things. You are making it clear that you are thinking of her in absolutely explicitly sexual terms. But you are also not just indulging in inappropriate conduct, you're also indulging in remarkably arrogant conduct, because the subtext of that observation is that this woman would want to have sexual relations with you, which is unlikely, I think. And that brings me to a story that has been published in various newspapers today about a senior judge who has been disciplined for sending a love letter to a young colleague. He passed a handwritten letter to a woman that spoke of his feelings for her. Now, the reason why I want to have this conversation today is because I used to joke a bit about how hard it would be in the modern world for you to register romantic interest in a colleague in the way that I somehow managed to do 24 years ago, would you believe? So 24 years ago, I was a junior gossip columnist on the Daily Express, and the most amazing woman I'd ever met in my life began on the newspaper as a graduate trainee. So technically, I was a superior, albeit I had a pretty rubbish 3-day-a-week contract. It was still a staff job or a decent contract on a national newspaper. And I fell for her like 100 tons of bricks. But I've always been quite shy. You wouldn't think it probably, but I've always been quite shy in those kind of contexts. I need a very, very long run up. So we were working together, and she was a trainee, and a couple of the jobs that I had, it was suggested she might want to accompany me on. And then after that, I then started inviting her on more and more. And I eventually reached the point where I think she's going to come to another level concert with me because I'm reviewing it, and I'm not sure she'd be doing that if she didn't want to actually spend some time with me. And then we had dinner with another journalist and his wife, and she went to the loo, and I said, I think she might quite like me. And my friend's wife said, don't be ridiculous, mate. You're way, way, way out of your league on this one. And on it went. The worst moment was probably when I said, let's go to this nightclub. I'm on the guest list, thinking she'd be impressed. And we got to the nightclub and walked to the front of the queue, because if you're on the guest list, obviously you don't have to queue up. And I give my name to the lady with the clipboard, and she's clearly never heard of me. So she's going through the guest list on the clipboard looking for my name. And then the owner of the club is at the bottom of the stairs, and he shouts up, "Oh, hi," to my wife. And I haven't seen you for ages. Where have you been? I'm thinking, hang on a minute, I'm supposed to be impressive. Come in, straight through to the... So it was a long courtship. It was a very long time before I was confident that she liked me. And I don't know if you could do that now. Particularly given the status imbalance. So what I started saying, I used to make 2 jokes about this. The first was that I was so backwards in coming forwards when it came to people that I fancied, that I used to wait for a written invitation before I would make a move. I wasn't being, like massively, what's the word I want? I wasn't worried about the mores of the time. I wasn't particularly worried about overstepping the mark. I think I was just terrified of rejection. But my behaviour would have been exactly the same if I was being incredibly careful not to overstep the mark. But that wasn't my motivation, because in the early noughties and the 90s, there weren't really many marks. This is what I mean by social change. There weren't that many marks to overstep. If you liked someone at work, you just asked them out for a drink. The media, like many other sectors, powerful men would constantly be asking out younger women that they found attractive. Newspapers were pretty terrible for that kind of thing. And the other bit I used to say, so that was my modus operandi. I'd need a written invitation before I had the confidence to try to, progress a relationship. And the other thing I used to joke about when we started hearing stories about not being able to express a romantic interest in a colleague. It's happened relatively recently, where relationships between staff are actually verboten. They are now forbidden. People can lose their jobs if it turns out that they've had a relationship, regardless of status, and sex, whether it's a powerful woman with a junior man or a powerful man with a junior. There are companies now which do not allow you to have sexual relations in the workplace for reasons. So one step down from that, where you are allowed to have relations, but you're not allowed to do anything that might be considered inappropriate or threatening or disturbing. So I used to joke, well, I suppose you could always send a letter. So you're not, you can't comment or compliment. Of course you can compliment people, but, in a decent way. So I said, I suppose you'd have to send a letter now, would you, to someone to express an interest in them? So would you care to join me for some oysters on Thursday evening? would you care to, I send a letter about how much I admire your ankles and I would love to spend some time with you. So I send a letter. And the reason that I made that joke, it's not a great joke. Although if you think that's bad, you should hear the one I did about rocket science at 9:59 this morning. So I thought that's quite funny. You could send a letter because it's sarcasm, right? So, of course, no one's actually going to send a love letter. And how could anybody ever get into trouble for sending a letter to somebody they admired? A senior judge has been disciplined for sending a love letter to a young colleague in the latest misbehaviour saga to beset the bench in England. 57-year-old Oxford graduate, I'm glad they include these details in the Times stories, had written the letter and passed it to the young woman, but he now accepts that it was plainly inappropriate. In the woman's complaint to the investigations office, she detailed several allegations that this judge had confided in her about his relationship with senior judges and asked her to go for walks with him. The letter also stated that he loved the young woman and wanted to know her feelings in return. And as a consequence, the young woman became very distressed and said that she didn't want to work with the judge again or be put in a position where she would encounter him. And that's where the conversation starts, because I understand the status issue. I understand the young woman being disturbed. But what if she'd liked him? 03456060973. Can you explain in terms why this is so bad? Why sending a love letter to a junior colleague, which, as far as I'm aware, contained nothing indecent. I mean, we've had phone-ins on this programme about people sending pictures of their penises to complete strangers. And you've rung me up to tell me that's fine. Or that it's normal now to do thing pics. And that's why I warned you 10 minutes ago that I might be about to make a fool of myself, because it might be something that is blindingly obvious. But I come from a generation where sending a love letter is a relatively innocuous thing to do. And even if Keith sent me a love letter, if Keith sent me a love letter, I'd simply take him to one side, and Keith's obviously very senior to me. I'd take him to one side and I'd say, Keith, I'm so sorry, it's never going to happen. I hope we can carry on working together fruitfully and joyously together. So and that wouldn't be nice. That wouldn't be a very pleasant conversation. I have a colleague who once had to tell someone, categorically not Keith, that they had bad body odour. So there's lots of difficult conversations that you have to have in the workplace sometimes. But why is this love letter wrong? 0345 6060 973. And how can you express it? I mean, it may well be that we reach 1 o'clock today and conclude that a senior member of staff can never express a romantic interest in a junior member of staff. And you can explain to me why I shouldn't find that quite sad. Because there's a strong chance that if that were true in 1999, I wouldn't be married to the woman that I'm married to. So what's wrong with a love letter? And how can a high-status colleague express a romantic interest in a lower status colleague? And it doesn't matter whether it's man expressing interest in woman, woman expressing interest in man, woman expressing interest in woman, or man expressing interest in man. What's wrong with the love letter? And what else could he have done? 0345 6060 973. 20 minutes after 12. Andy says, couldn't you have gone through a third party like at school? I'd say my friend fancies you. I don't know. I don't think that would be any better than a love letter. So you have a older colleague has fallen quite hard for a younger colleague, and they want to let them know. In this case, he wants to let her know. So he sends a love letter. Not indecent, not pornographic, no photos, and he gets into a whole heap of trouble. And I kind of understand why, but I want you to explain it to me better. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Sarah says, love letters sounds creepy these days. And that breaks my heart. Does it? Does that sound... Let me speak to some younger colleagues. Does that sound creepy to you? Love letters? Eleanor? A love letter? Really? A bit, Emily? Oh, Lord. Really? It's a love letter? Oh, it's a love letter if you like them as well. Anyway. Yeah. But okay. You mean an unsolicited love letter? That's not quite what I meant, actually. Yeah, unrequited and unsolicited. Yeah. Okay. So what else could he do? Should he listen to Mike Skinner more? The track about the thing he saw last night on ITV. If she plays with her hair, then she must be into you. So you wait for that. So, do you see what I mean? I wouldn't want to be young today. I really wouldn't. Carol's in East Grinstead. Carol, what would you like to say?
I'm gobsmacked. I'm totally gobsmacked.
What by?
I'm really. I'm probably old school. I'm in early 70s.
Okay.
I was in PA investment and then nursing. Used to happen all the time. And I mean...
But that doesn't mean it's good. We used to send kids up chimneys, but we wouldn't bring that back in a hurry. So I'm always slightly wary of thinking that everything was okay. But what you're saying is it didn't do me any harm.
What I'm saying is, if he sent a letter, then all she had to do was either tell him, which is probably quite hard, or send him a nice note back saying, sorry, but no go. I like you as a colleague, blah, blah.
Yes.
That's it. Why take it further? So the poor guy now is in the papers. It's bonkers. And quite frankly, he was a judge, so I don't know what she was, whether she was a lawyer, solicitor. You have to be assertive in that job. Come on. You didn't have to drag the poor guy to the cleaners.
No, I don't. Well, I mean, that's the world we live in now, where this complaint will be upheld and the sender of the letter will be cautioned for behaving in a plainly inappropriate action. And I'm more comfortable with that than you are.
Yeah.
But I still don't know what he could... I mean, so he's got two choices as it stands. He either lives with his crush and does absolutely nothing about it, or he articulates his crush. And the most innocuous way I can think of articulating a crush would be in a letter, actually.
Exactly.
And therefore, we are in a world where you cannot articulate your crush on a younger colleague, which I can live with. But I married the younger colleague that I had a crush on in 2000.
Well, that was very nice. I just think it's very... What saddens me is this girl took him to the cleaners.
Well, she hasn't taken anyone to the cleaners,
she's
Carol.
ridiculed him.
Well, she hasn't, because no names have been made public. No names have been public. And remember, he's her boss, so she has been very assertive. She went through the proper channels to complain. That's assertive. Your generation didn't have the guts to complain.
No. We just told them. Sorry, you just dealt with it.
Well, she did.
Yes, but she didn't to him, did she?
No, she dealt with it in a way that makes sure he won't try it on with anybody else ever again. You didn't.
But is it really trying on?
Yes.
We've all got hearts. He really fancied her and whatever.
Well, I'm afraid you've rung in to persuade me in one direction. You're sending me off in the other at 100 miles an hour, Carol. It's just...
No, you married your love of your life.
How dare you bring my personal life into this conversation? That's absolutely outrageous. 24 minutes after 12. What would you do? Everyone thinks letters are creepy. You didn't go to boarding school. When we were at boarding school, we thought we were going out with people that we only saw once every school holiday, and the rest of the time the romance was conducted entirely in an epistolatory message. No, she didn't go to a different school, Keith. Well, she did go to a different school, but she existed. Honestly, that's brilliant at writing letters in those days. 25 minutes after 12. Thank you, Carol. Heather's in Bromley. Heather, what would you like to say?
What I would like to say is, first and foremost, I come from a generation and that if a man writes a letter or even touches you where he's not meant to, he's not meant to touch you, tell him where to get off.
Yeah, but hang on a minute. How have we leapt from writing a letter to inappropriate touching?
No. Hear me out.
Okay,
right, I'm giving you an example.
All
right,
be careful.
Right?
Yes.
But it's me. I come from that generation of people, and also my personality is that if somebody writes a letter and they want to take me out on a date, or even just verbally asks me,
yes,
I would just say, not interested. I'm sorry, thank you, but I'm not interested. But you've got to take into account some women get feel intimidated by even what I would personally describe as the silliest things. But that's my personal view
and the
of it.
rules have to reach as many people as they can. You make the rules as much for the people who do feel intimidated as you do for the people who don't.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's the times we live in.
Why is it unfortunate? Why is it unfortunate to tell these men to stop sending letters to much younger colleagues in the hope of having romantic relations with them?
There's nothing unfortunate about that, but there are some people, they just feel intimidated. That first letter, you may not understand it, I don't understand it.
I understand it.
I
understand it. How can I ever go to work again knowing that this fella's fancies the potatoes off me? I can't work. How can I work with him again? He sent me a bloody love letter.
I can't see anything wrong in that.
How can I work with him? Every time I bend over, I'm going to think he's checking out my buns.
Now you're the one who's brought up the physical thing. You put me on the stand for saying it, and now you're doing exactly the same thing.
Au contraire, it's not inappropriate touching, but I'm going to think he might want to inappropriately touch me every time that we're alone together in an office. How can I ever work with him productively again without being distracted by his declaration of desire?
From sending a letter to touching.
You're the one who's obsessed with touching. I'm just sending letters.
Yeah, but you mentioned the touching as
well. No, I'm
getting
letters. That's the point. The reason, the bit you don't get is why she would be so disturbed by this is because it completely breaks up the workplace dynamic, the boss-employee dynamic. And you're right, for your generation, that wasn't a factor because you were not protected from that dynamic. It was perfectly reasonable for the person who paid your wages to ask you out on a date.
Perfect reason. And I can understand
but it's wrong.
Why I could understand why she would take this further.
It's wrong.
She's from a different generation.
No, well, that's part of it, but it's wrong. And this is where I perhaps sound as if I come from a different generation from this young woman, because I would say it's wrong until she welcomed the letter. And then what happens? So how can you tell him he's wrong to send it if he'd sent it to two women and one said, oh, yes, I'll see you on Friday for some oysters. And the other one said, I'm deeply disturbed by this. I'm going to HR. What does that say about the rightness or the wrongness of sending the letter in the first place?
For me personally, I don't think there was anything wrong in sending the letters.
No, I know you don't, but I do because of the impact it will have on the workplace dynamic and upon relationships in the workplace. But then again, maybe I need a woman from my own generation to explain to me why. If the letter had been warmly received, it wouldn't be an HR matter, but it wasn't welcome and therefore it was. So just don't send any letters seems to be the way of avoiding the problem. But that leads you into the territory that Carol and Heather are in, where it somehow feels sad to them that the generational shift has delivered this sort of scenario. 0345 6060 973. So if I read this, right, I'm not going to look at the name at the bottom. And I'm just going to see how many lines into it I need to go, because I've read the first one. It just says, James, you can be such an... can I say that on the radio? You can be such a buttock at times. And that's all I've seen so far. So I'm going to read into it. And at some point, it's quite long. It's about 10 lines long. And at some point in it, I'm going to make a judgment on whether it's from a man or a woman. All right, James, you can be such a bleep at times. Next thing you will be saying, if I go to a nightclub or bar and ask a girl out, oh, well, so it's probably a man then she should be complaining and going to the newspapers. No, if you're in a nightclub or a bar, man, then you are not potentially abusing your power as a superior in the workplace. I mean, with respect, I can indeed be a bit of a bleep at times, but you're being a bit silly on this occasion, because going up to somebody in a bar and saying, hey, can I buy you a drink? And she says no, and I walk away again, is nowhere near the same as saying to someone who relies upon me for professional advancement and quite possibly her income, saying, I think you should have dinner with me on Friday. You must be able to see that, surely. It's 12:30. Amelia Cox has your headlines. 33 minutes after 12. This is brilliant from one of my favourite contributors, Emma. Does he really need to spill out his heartfelt feelings whenever he feels that need? We teach toddlers emotional regulation for a reason. We are unfortunately still languishing in a society that prioritises the, quotes, kindly romantic stroke unkindly penis feelings of dudes over professional relationships and ethical guidelines. And I get all that, but what if she liked him? How would she ever know that he liked her? I don't think that makes me a dinosaur. Does that make me a dinosaur? What if she liked him? How would he ever know that he liked her? How old are you? You 19, 20? Do I sound like a dinosaur to you? No. Well, that's a very interesting conversation, isn't it? Sid's in Slough. Sid, what would you like to say?
Hi, I think in this situation there's a position of authority from the judge.
And that is crucial. A lot of people are missing that. That's why we can't even ask someone out for a drink anymore. But it doesn't change the question of how would he ever find out whether she liked him if he didn't tell her that he liked her?
I mean, initially there would be signs that perhaps the judge may have seen that she may have been interested in some senses. However, because the boss holds a position of authority, they will never know, because the subordinate employee may feel pressured to respond positively or may fear negative consequences. So I think if you're in a position of authority, you need to be really careful with these things. Because
I think I would have said...
coercion.
No, I know, but I would have said that sending a letter was being really careful, possibly before this conversation started.
Perhaps, yes, that's true, sending a letter once. But once she expressed her wishes that she didn't want to continue on with the conversation in that way, I think it was inappropriate to continue it on and continue persisting. I think we need to draw the line between what is an initial invitation and what leads to sexual harassment within the workplace.
Yeah, I don't dispute any of that. And I don't think my question is crass, but how can he find out whether or not his feelings are reciprocated in your world?
I think
in the world that you've described.
Realistically, I think it's appropriate to just stay away from colleagues in general, especially currently.
So just tough. It's just bad luck. You might think this person is the love of your life, but as long as you're their boss, you just don't go there.
Like I said, initial invitation in a respectful way, yes, you could do that. But if you're in a position of power, I think you should think twice about that, because the person who you are sending an
but
invitation
you can't. This is the initial expression of interest, and that's what he's in trouble for.
But he did persist afterwards.
No,
even though
the letter is the point of the complaint.
On a walk and so forth.
No, that was all before. The letter is the point of the complaint. So here's the ruling. Here's the ruling. This is why he's guilty of serious misconduct. By giving the letter to the young woman, he was clearly expressing his love for her and that he wanted to take things further. His actions were part of a course of escalating conduct towards a young woman, a junior member of staff who was in a very vulnerable position in relation to him. He had abused his position and crossed lines which should not be crossed. So I can live with this. It just makes me wonder if I'd had one more promotion back in 1999, whether I'd be married today to the woman that I'm married to. Because if I had been more senior, it would have been absolutely unacceptable for me to make any kind of advance upon her. And I can say that's fine. I can live in that world, but it might mean that, I didn't have the most amazing wife in the world. Sid.
I mean, I'm really happy to hear about your experience, but I reckon your experience sounds a bit subjective to you, and unfortunately, a lot of women do experience that.
And that's the price you pay.
Authority and power imbalance.
I think you're right.
I think laws have been created.
Yeah.
And myself, I experienced it, and it felt extremely uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And this is why we have these laws in place to protect our women in the workplace. And I think, yes, initially, in a good intention way, it's okay to perhaps express your interest. But then it shouldn't persist if the woman responds in a way which is she doesn't want to respond.
And of course, we don't know all of the details. Yeah, no, you're brilliant. You're explaining this perfectly. Did HR or the law protect you at all when you found yourself in this situation?
Sadly, it didn't even go that far because of the societal pressure that I was in. People were literally saying, just don't get yourself involved in that situation to that extent. And
as in, don't make a fuss.
My job.
Don't make a fuss about it, because you'll do yourself damage.
Exactly, but that's the issue. This is why we're trying to prevent women from ending up in situations like the one that I was in. And this is why we just say, just stay away from doing stuff like that if you're in a position of power, because you just don't know how that woman is going to feel. She might be compelled to say yes or respond positively because she feels like if she doesn't, she might lose her job, or if she does say no, she's going to be villainized in the workplace. And people who are in positions of power need to consider this when they are making advancements in such a way, because it's unfair then if the woman says no and then everyone in the workplace starts villainizing her because the boss may have felt a certain way, and we just don't know how it's going to end. So I think it's
and that's it. And so
there's too much imbalance.
No, and this is why you use the word subjective, isn't it? Because subjectively, you're always going to be able to find wrinkles and questions, but objectively, the law has to protect the junior member of staff, male or female. It's more likely to be, but the law has to do it, and the price, quotes we, end quotes, pay for that is the removal from the table of the possibility of a reciprocated romantic relationship in the workplace between two people who like each other.
I mean, if the judge, for example, wasn't a judge and was another junior lawyer,
exactly,
that would have been different, because the lady might not have felt that extreme
and that actually,
immediate pressure.
Do you know, that takes my subjective experience off the table as well, because I don't think I was a superior on paper. I just had a slightly cooler beat at the time because I was doing showbiz, so there'd be absolutely no question of her saying, no, I don't want to come to another level concert with you, having a negative impact on her career advancement. So I don't need to worry about that either, although the principle stands. I don't know. I mean, do you know what it does? It flies in the face of that. Sid, you were brilliant. Thank you. I'm so sorry that you had to go through what you went through to have such a clear insight on this issue. But it kills the concept of the one. Do you remember? Well, do you remember? You probably still do. Do you talk about the one? Is it the one? Oh, I've started seeing this guy. I really like him. Do you think he might be the one? I've started seeing this guy. I said, yeah, she could be the one. What if the one is the one that you like, but you can't send a letter to? Because if you do, you're going to get a serious misconduct charge against you. So, this is a world in which we accept that the one does not exist. Miss Yulua is in Fulham. What would you like to say about this?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Good to speak to you. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm very well. How's your mum?
Yeah, no, she's good. She's good. She didn't listen when you were on holiday because
Don't say that. Don't come on here and start insulting my sort of colleagues.
I'm so sorry.
Right.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, but
That's
she was
all
like,
right.
I'm so sorry. It's James or nothing.
No, I kind of agree. Carry on.
So my first thing is always like, it's workplace relationships are just never worth it. They're never. I mean, obviously for you,
my marriage was a workplace. So many people I know met their partners at work.
I know. I think it's always a risk.
Yeah.
It's always a risk. For example, I don't know. If you think it could be long term or something nice, yeah, go for it. Maybe. But if it's a fling, stay away. Just stay away.
Don't all long term things begin as potential flings?
No.
Oh, I'm so old.
No, that's definitely. I mean, you know what a situationship is, James.
Yeah, of course, actually.
Exactly.
So you wouldn't do that at work because that's going to. Because that could have all sorts of repercussions. Even then, I don't know if it's a genuine situationship where neither party is exploiting or taking advantage of the other. That's less likely to have difficult ramifications in the workplace than thinking it's a long-term relationship and then coming a cropper 6 months or 2 years in.
Yeah, but one person always catches feelings in the situation. No, I've never heard of a situationship that ends well.
No, you're right.
Someone is always upset.
Someone's always pretending that it's just friends with benefits, whereas they're actually secretly hoping it's about to turn into a great love story.
Exactly.
So, and it doesn't. And again, maybe generational issues are relevant here because there are so many ways to meet people these days. Most obviously online. That the idea that you're only going to meet people in your orbit, which is going to be almost entirely work or friends of friends, it actually doesn't.
A bond that never falls apart. Through the highs and through the lows, together our connection grows. Our connection grows. From childhood dreams to grown-up schemes, we navigate life's endless streams. Hand in hand we face the night. Side by side we find the light. Brotherhood forever strong, in each other's arms where we belong. Through the storm and through the fire, our bond will never tire.
Doesn't matter to say, well, no, let's take work out of that equation entirely. That's just not an option.
Yeah, I think that's better. But subsequently, what I was for this case particularly, I personally think she took it too far. But I can also appreciate that this is very subjective. So if you have the kind of personality like mine, where you kind of don't really take these things to heart, and it's like, look, if you write me a letter, I'm not really going to do that. But then again, as a black woman, I also know that my stance is going to be different because I'm not trying to rock the boat.
Okay, yeah.
So, and I know obviously we don't know about race, and
we don't know that this woman wasn't black, but I understand you speak from where you sit.
Yeah, in that, like, I'm not even trying to have the issue.
Yeah.
I'd rather be awkward because I know the repercussions for me. So I think
what would it be like though if you got the letter and it gave you the ick?
Yeah.
And you told him politely, and then a week later you're working late together on a case and there's nobody else there. It changes everything, doesn't it, the existence of this letter?
It changes everything, but I think knowing as many black female lawyers as I do, they just take the L. They take the L, they deal with it, they'd wait. Like, for example, if you're a solicitor...
Doesn't mean they should. That doesn't mean they should have to.
They shouldn't have to, but we do all the time. It's just easier. It's easier. But I can also understand why she just said, I don't want to be in that position. I want to go to work and feel comfortable.
Yeah.
I don't want to have to, be looking at this judge every 2 seconds and thinking, oh, is he going to try and talk to me in a corner, or is he going to try and say something else? I just want peace when I go to work.
I just want peace when I go to work. Do you hear that, Keith? Same here. I just want some peace. Thank you. I mean, as ever, it's a sparkling contribution. I nearly said from the younger generation then, but I don't want to sound quite that ridiculous. Emis Yulua, thank you. 12:45 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the mysteries of modern dating are possibly becoming more mysterious by the minute. It's 12:47, so depending on your age, you find the idea of any approach by a senior member of staff, romantic approach by a senior member of staff to a junior member of staff, being absolutely forbidden now. Depending on your age, you find it on the scale from somewhere between absolutely unbelievably sad and awful to being utterly unremarkably normal. And I move in the course of conversations like this one from the older position to the younger position, largely as a consequence of the quality of the calls that we've got. Speaking of age differentials, my guest on Full Disclosure this week is Martin O'Neill, the Northern Irish footballer and manager. But the producer has never heard of him, or indeed of Brian Clough. In fact, I just had to teach her how to pronounce the word Clough, Clough. So I thought that I'd let you decide which clip to play out today, because I'm not getting much by way of editorial collaboration or cooperation. So here are the clips. Which would you rather hear? Martin telling James about how he got signed by Nottingham Forest. Have you heard of Nottingham Forest? Have you heard? Yeah. Got signed, Nottingham Forest, aged just 18, and whether professional football quite lived up to his expectations. Martin telling James about growing up in a Gaelic football family, but always wanting to be a pro English footballer in the English League. And finally, Martin telling James about how Brian Clough's arrival at Nottingham Forest changed the course of the club's history, and he explains why he thinks Clough was such a brilliant manager. So you've got, that's A, B or C, and you've got about 2 minutes to WhatsApp me 0345 6060 973 or text me 84850, which one of those clips you want, and then I'll play it. Back to workplace romance is probably not the right word to use, actually, because it plays into the older generation attitude to this story as opposed to the younger generation. Potential romance? Even that doesn't feel quite right, does it? Sarah's in Woodford. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Hello, thank you for having me on.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome.
And I just wanted to... This case is obviously very particular about a letter.
Yeah.
And it seems that the first two callers you had on, they was very much romanticising letters,
yes,
which letters can be. But in this case, it wasn't. And speaking on a broader spectrum of workplaces, receiving any letter that is unsolicited, regardless of the intention behind it, it creates an awkward, uncomfortable atmosphere. I've experienced this. Not with letters,
right?
But with
words.
words.
I was going to say all letters are unsolicited all letters are unsolicited in a way, aren't they?
Potentially.
Yeah, go on.
Common sense plays a part in here that he would have had a feeling beforehand of the atmosphere,
yes,
and if it was going to be reciprocated. He still chose to send the letter. And I just still can't believe this narrative is still being mentioned in this day and age where men don't understand. Please don't approach anything other than work in the workplace.
Right. Is that straightforward to you?
Yeah, there's plenty of time outside of work in social environments. I'm sure there's work.
What if you're equals? Oh, in the workplace. So you could court a colleague outside the workplace.
I think it would be a lot less uncomfortable.
Yeah, okay. But a letter is outside. A letter. I'm being the devil's advocate a bit, Sarah. The letter is outside the workplace.
Yeah. I still received messages and sort of teams outside of work hours.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And it still creates such a sense of awkwardness. I had the first 2 jobs were from equals, colleagues.
Yeah.
And the third one was so bad from my direct superior, I ended up leaving that job.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to because it has such a knock-on effect. It then creates sort of jealousy. Other people were picking up on I was getting special treatment. I didn't want it. I was engaged. He knew I was planning to get married. It was completely didn't want it. So I just think, I know you say that some people might say, well, you might miss the one.
No.
But unfortunately, you can't. It's not fair on the person receiving it, but you can risk that. And what are the chances of them being the one? You were very lucky.
I was.
I know that.
So was she. But that's it, isn't it? To you, and I think out of all the contributors for whom this is a no-brainer, you've made it the biggest no-brainer of all. Just don't go there.
Yeah, just please avoid it. Women have struggled to be taken seriously in a professional manner for so long. And then with one comment, with someone overhearing something, with one email that someone might see, all of your status and your career and your academia goes out the window. And people just focus on that.
You're so right. You had to leave because that place where you were working didn't have any systems in place that could help you?
I didn't feel comfortable.
You didn't fancy the fight?
He'd been there a lot longer than me. He was older and he was my direct superior. If I was to then... I'm not a confrontational person. My heart's beating out my chest just making this phone call.
Oh, it's only me.
So it's a lot easier said than done. Saying, oh, just tell them to go away. But when it's your superior, you then worry about backlash.
Boss. It's your boss, and that changes a lot. I mean, it's bad in any context, but that means it's every aspect of your job that is potentially affected, isn't it?
At risk. And you worry about the backlash and if they would want to keep you, if they would... You see it in films and things, then they make rumours and you get names. People give you nicknames and it creates a whole other world of problems. So for me, it was easier to walk away, and I'm so happy I did because sometimes you don't know what's best for you.
Oh, we've even got a happy ending. It's my favourite call. It's my favourite call of the day, Sarah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
No, how's your heart? How's your heart?
Still going.
Well, that's a relief. It's 12:53. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. How long is clip 3? Do we know? 2 minutes and 8. So I could squeeze Erin in Hackney. It's clip 3. It's the Brian Clough one. I told you that's the one people would like. Erin is in Hackney. Erin, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
God, I've always wanted to say I'm a long-time listener and first-time caller, so I guess I'm saying that now.
Fantastic. Dreams can come true.
I've got I find this topic really interesting, and I've got a couple of points on it. And the first one is, I think when you were talking about your past, and I think a lot of people, they think about, they romanticize letters and they think, oh, can't I just meet people where I work? But in the past, you had to meet people where you worked or frequented because you didn't have dating apps.
Yeah.
And now, you can look outside of your work and you don't have to do that. So that's one thing. And then the other point is that I really agree with the last caller. I think not only is it something that you shouldn't just do for HR reasons, but also in this economy for younger people, it is really hard to get a job. And if you have a senior member of staff making moves on you in any way, in a letter, in a text, whatever, you kind of have to play along with it sometimes, or you have to because you could lose your job. And a lot of times they will go with the senior person HR rather than the younger person. And you might not even be able to get another job,
So it is, I like this. The hour has really covered all of the available perspectives and ended up with a fairly clear conclusion that it's a no-brainer. You just don't go there. Hasn't worked for everybody. Stanley's been in touch to say, James, you have been so unintelligent. What about when a woman receives a letter from a more attractive junior person? it's definitely me that's being unintelligent here, Stanley. I think we can definitely all agree about that. Quite a few of you wondering whether Martin O'Neill had any Kidderminster Harriers stories, and actually he did. So you're not as clever as you think you are. This is probably the most niche thing I've said this year. But he signed Kim Casey for Wycombe Wanderers. That's not what he's talking about in this clip.
Let's say by 1975, I'm now a professional for about 3.5 years or whatever the case may be. And it has been a bit of a struggle, real struggle. It's, some managers liking you, other managers leaving, and then new managers coming in and not liking you, all that type of stuff. And so Brian Clough arrives, changes the course of the club's history. The next 5 years have just been sensational, absolutely.
Beyond your wildest
dreams to win the European Cup twice and things like this here. But if just say, for instance, if I'd picked up an injury by 1975, you might be asking me a different question. Was it worth it? What would you have been doing? Would you have gone back to Ireland again, try to finish your law degree? I just don't know. So sometimes along the way you get a little bit of luck, and the luck came with Brian Clough arriving at the football club.
Why was he so instrumental? And was it immediately clear what a one-off he was? I've got to tell you this.
Yeah. I think
I can listen to Brian Clough stories all day long.
You would have really enjoyed him. He was terrific. So. And you would have even accepted the fact if he called you young man. Young man. Now, I might not know your profession as well as you do, son, but don't talk to me about football. So that's the best I can do, and it's not great. But I must admit, I had for seemingly a long time, fights with him, and to try and prove him wrong rather than right, as much as anything else. But it was worth it. Whether he felt that was the best, or that he felt that was the best way of getting the best out of me, I don't know. Sometimes I could have done with just a slightly bit more praise but all of those things, as most people do. But overall, if you had said to me in 1975, by the way, you're going to have a really tough time with him, but you're going to survive the cull, which there's going to be because he's going to get rid of a lot of players, and that you will, by the turn of the next decade, you will have been involved in a championship winning team, a League Cup winning side a couple of times, and a European Cup for the second successive year. I think it would have taken that.
It is 12:58. Crikey, Andrew's paying attention, even if nobody else is. He says, what about the hook and tease? What newspaper was it where the reader was complaining about Farage's absence of interest in his constituents in Clay? It was the Daily Mail, of all places, that printed that. That was Full Disclosure with Martin O'Neill, my guest this week. And there's loads and loads and loads and loads of lovely stories. My apologies to Jane and Erin and Etty and Naz and Jason and Chris and Jill and others, particularly Jane, who I think was about to tell us a story about a real life scenario unfolding as we speak, where a senior colleague is pursuing a junior colleague in the workplace to the embarrassment and annoyance of almost everybody else, which I think speaks volumes, doesn't it? And thank you for all the nice comments about the shirt that I'm wearing today. That's because the clips have obviously got out before I finished work for the day, and I agree. I think these colours are lovely on me. It's the first day so far, Vanessa Phelps, that I've been more colourful than you have in there.
I think you look exquisite.
Oh, there we go. No, that's not. Put it in a letter. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you'll also find all of LBC's shows to catch up on, as well as all of Global's live radio stations. So download Global Player for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick. But now, as you just heard, standing in for Sheila Fogarty, it's Vanessa Phelps. 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 It's Vanessa